A familiar face. Zoe couldn't believe her eyes. She had been stationed at Fuyuki Airport under Draco's orders, tasked with observing the arrival of Irisviel, von Einsburn, and her servant Saber. The plan was simple: watch and report. Yet, what she saw left her momentarily stunned. "Is that Mordred?" Zoe mumbled unconsciously, narrowing her eyes to take a closer look. The first figure to step out was undoubtedly Irisviel, von Einsburn. Her long silver hair, striking red eyes, and regal demeanor perfectly matched Draco's description. She wore a burgundy blouse adorned with a brooch, paired with a white skirt, thigh-high white boots, and black tights. She was a vision of elegance, exuding an effortless nobility that seemed to turn heads wherever she went. But it was the person walking beside her that caught Zoe off guard. The second figure was a young woman with finely textured blonde hair that gleamed like gold dust, soft green eyes, and a face that combined elegance with naivety. Her slender physique and poised demeanor gave her an almost ethereal beauty. If Zoe didn't know better, she would have mistaken her for Mordred. However, this girl carried herself with a cold, serious air that Mordred lacked. And then there was the outfit. Why is she dressed like a butler? Zoe muttered, unable to suppress her confusion. The servant Saber was clad in a dark blue dress shirt and tie beneath a French continental-style suit. The androgynous ensemble suited her serious and commanding demeanor, but it was such an unusual choice for a knight of legend that Zoe couldn't help but question it. "She's not Mordred," Zoe murmured, her brows furrowing in thought. "But she looks exactly like her. The resemblance is uncanny." Her mind raced, piecing together the clues. The matching class, the nearly identical appearance. There was only one logical conclusion. "Arthur Pendragon," Zoe whispered. "The king of knights herself. The arrival of the king. Someone is watching us," Artoria said quietly, her sharp gaze scanning the bustling airport. "Is that so?" Irisviel replied with a gentle smile, her tone almost dismissive. She then glanced down at the tailored butler outfit she had chosen for Artoria. "What do you think of the clothes? I wanted something practical, yet complementary to my own style. Do you dislike them?" "Not at all," Artoria replied. "These clothes are comfortable and allow for ease of movement. Besides, I'm accustomed to being mistaken for a man." Irisviel chuckled softly. The choice to forego armor was a practical one, but it was clear she had indulged in her own sense of fashion. After handing their luggage to a pair of Einsburn maids, who promptly dispatched the belongings to their forest estate outside the city, Irisviel and Artoria made their way through customs. Their striking appearances and eccentric clothing drew stares from everyone they passed, causing Irisviel to smile with a mix of pride and embarrassment. "As I thought, is something wrong with my outfit?" Artoria asked, her voice tinged with discomfort as she noticed the attention. "Perhaps it's a bit too fancy," Irisviel admitted with a sheepish grin. The truth was, both women were breathtakingly beautiful, and their unusual attire only amplified the attention they received. "Let's not dwell on it," Irisviel said, taking Artoria's hand. "We're in Japan now. Let's enjoy ourselves a little before the battles begin." "Enjoy ourselves?" Artoria frowned. "This is not a vacation, Irisviel. The heavens feel has already started. We must remain vigilant." Unfazed, Irisviel continued leading the way, her steps light and cheerful. Artoria could only sigh and follow, ever the dutiful knight. Reporting back. "They've arrived," Draco said confidently as Zoe approached him. "Yes," Zoe confirmed, her expression troubled. "But about that servant?" Draco raised a finger to his lips, silencing her. "It's a surprise for Mordred." Zoe raised an eyebrow, but chose not to press further. "My work here is done," she said, brushing past him. "Call me if you need me again." "Rest well," Draco replied before turning to address Zoe one last time. "And don't worry. Have I ever been wrong?" Zoe sighed, exasperated. "You'll do whatever you want anyway." With that, she disappeared into her room. Draco smiled to himself and headed to the next room. Inside, Mordred was lounging on the bed, flipping through a comic book. "Get ready," Draco said, leaning against the doorframe. "We're moving out tonight." A wide grin spread across Mordred's face. "Finally, let's go kick some ass." a city of strangers. By the time Irisviel and Artoria reached the heart of Fuyuki City, the sun was setting, painting the streets in hues of gold and orange. "How lively," Irisviel remarked, her silver hair catching the light as she admired the bustling city. Artoria, however, remained on edge, her sharp gaze scanning their surroundings. "Kiritsugu should already be here, correct?" "Yes," Irisviel replied. "He arrived half a day ahead of us. Will we meet him soon?" "He'll find us when the time is right," Irisviel said, her tone nonchalant. Artoria didn't press further, but silently noted the strange dynamic between the Einsburn couple. "What's the plan now?" Artoria asked. "For now, we'll observe and adapt to the situation as it unfolds." Artoria frowned. "You mean we're doing nothing?" "Exactly," Irisviel said with a mischievous smile, clearly enjoying her companion's frustration. "But since we're here, why not explore the city a little? It might be fun." Artoria hesitated, her instincts screaming against the idea. "Irisviel, this is enemy territory. We can't afford to let our guard down." "Don't worry, Saber," Irisviel said reassuringly. "You'll sense any servant within range, right?" "Yes, but there are skills that can obscure their presence." "And what if the threat isn't a servant?" A calm, unfamiliar voice interrupted. Artoria spun toward the source of the voice, her instincts flaring. "Who's there?" she demanded, stepping protectively in front of Irisviel. From the shadows, a young man and woman emerged. Artoria's gaze fixed on the woman, and her eyes narrowed. Irisviel stepped back, she commanded. "This could be trouble, a fateful encounter." "Master, where are we going?" Mordred asked, tilting her head in curiosity. "To the beach," Draco replied casually. "Huh, the beach? But I didn't bring my swimsuit," Mordred exclaimed, her confusion written all over her face. Smack! Draco lightly tapped her on the head, an instinctive reaction to her cluelessness. "You idiot," he said with a sigh. "We're not going to swim. We're going to fight." Mordred blinked, processing the shift in tone. "Oh, so, what's happening tonight?" "One of the most important events in this war," Draco explained. "Nearly all the servants will gather. Saber, Lancer, Ryder, Archer, and Berserker will be present. Assassin will likely be watching from the shadows." Mordred's lips curled into an eager grin. This was what she had been waiting for, a chance to prove herself in battle, to clash with other legendary figures and claim victory. As they sped through the dusky streets of Fuyuki, Draco suddenly turned to Mordred, his voice softer yet serious. "Mordred, what's your dream?" Caught off guard by the question, Mordred hesitated. "Why do you ask, Master?" "You already know. I want to repeat my father's test, to pull the sword from the stone and prove that I, too, can be the king of Britain." Draco nodded, unsurprised by the answer. He knew Mordred well, both from his prior knowledge of her story and from the years they had spent together. Yet, something in her response still felt incomplete, and Draco couldn't help but press further. "Are you sure that's all you want?" he asked, his tone probing. "Of course," Mordred said firmly. "I need to prove my father wrong. I need to show that I'm worthy." Before Draco could reply, they arrived at their destination, the beach. The cool night breeze carried the faint scent of salt water as the waves gently lapped at the shore. Despite the serene setting, the tension in the air was palpable. Draco glanced at Mordred. "Have you ever thought about showing your father in person? Showing them what you're worth?" "What do you mean?" Mordred asked, her voice laced with confusion. Draco didn't answer directly. Instead, he pointed toward the shoreline, where two figures stood illuminated by the moonlight. "We're here. Don't act until I give the signal." "That's an order." "Yes, Master," Mordred replied, her demeanor shifting to one of focused determination. The king and the knight. The two women on the beach were deep in conversation. The first was a striking woman with platinum hair and an air of nobility, none other than Irisviel, von Einsburn. The second was dressed in a butler's suit, her golden hair tied back neatly, her posture composed. Though she carried herself with poise, her piercing green eyes were sharp and alert. Artoria Pendragon, Saber of the Holy Grail War. Mordred's eyes widened as she recognized the figure before her. She didn't need any explanation. She would never forget her father. Even now, Artoria's calm and collected demeanor grated on her nerves. "Master," Mordred muttered, her bangs obscuring her face as she clenched her fists. "Let me fight." Draco placed a hand on her head, his voice calm yet supportive. "Of course. I wouldn't have brought you here if you weren't going to fight. This is your chance to show her who you are." Mordred looked up, a wild smile spreading across her face. "Thank you, Master. I owe you for this." The two approached Irisviel and Artoria, Draco using his stealth ability to mask their presence. Still, Mordred's overwhelming bloodlust began to seep through, catching Artoria's attention. "Someone's here," Artoria said sharply, turning toward the source of the threat. Her green eyes locked onto Mordred, widening in shock. "You are—" Irisviel followed Artoria's gaze, her expression confused. "Saber? No, you're not Saber. Who are you?" Though Mordred's appearance was nearly identical to Artoria's, her aura and demeanor were vastly different. Where Artoria exuded calm authority, Mordred radiated fiery defiance. "Irisviel," Draco said, addressing the homunculus directly. "Let's step aside. This is a father-daughter conversation. How do you know my name?" Irisviel asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Draco smiled. "I know many things. Too many, perhaps. But for now, let's give them space." Irisviel hesitated, glancing at Artoria for guidance. "Irisviel, stay close to me," Artoria warned, her voice firm. "This man, he's dangerous." "Relax, King of Knights," Draco said, his voice calm yet confident. "I have no intention of harming her. Irisviel is crucial to this war's outcome, and I won't let anything happen to her." Before Artoria could protest further, Draco walked away with Irisviel, leaving Mordred alone with her father. Father and daughter. The tension between Mordred and Artoria was palpable, the air heavy with unspoken emotions. "What are you doing here, Mordred?" Artoria asked, her tone steady yet cold. "I am the servant Saber. Have you fallen so far that you've become a berserker?" Mordred's lips curled into a sneer. "I'm Saber too. My master and I have no stake in this war. We're outsiders." Artoria frowned, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. "Outsiders or not, what is your purpose here?" Mordred's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with malice. "To kill you?" A revelation. Away from the confrontation, Draco and Irisviel stood at the edge of the beach. "How do you know my name?" Irisviel asked again, her unease growing. "I told you I know many things," Draco said simply. "I know about the servants, their masters, and even their secrets. For example, how is Ilia?" Irisviel froze, her eyes widening in shock. "How do you know about Ilia?" Draco smiled faintly. "Do you believe me now?" "I know everything, Irisviel. That's why I can tell you, Kiritsugu's dream is doomed to fail." "That's not true," Irisviel protested. "The Holy Grail can grant his wish." "No, it can't," Draco said, shaking his head. "The Grail is corrupted. The Einsburns ensured that. If Kiritsugu's wish were to come true, it would mean the eradication of humanity." "That's impossible," Irisviel whispered, her voice trembling. Draco's gaze softened. "You care for him. I understand that. But the truth is harsh. The Grail can't save this world. It will destroy it." As Irisviel grappled with the weight of his words, Draco glanced back at the beach, where two knights prepared to clash under the moonlight.
Hey everyone, Quantum Audiobook here. Sorry for interrupting, but if you're enjoying this content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your thoughts on this novel in the comments, and don't forget to like the video.
Mordred and Artoria were staring at each other. Father and son, or mother and daughter. It was difficult to describe the relationship between these two individuals. Mordred initially admired Artoria as the perfect king and tried to defend the king's name from slander. However, there was one event in Mordred's life that turned everything around. This is when a third character crucial to understanding the father-son/mother-daughter relationship enters the picture. And this is none other than the Night King's sister, Morgan Le Fay. In an attempt to dethrone Artoria, Mordred was conceived by Morgan. The only reason why Mordred existed was to inherit Artoria's throne. Mordred felt ashamed of her twisted birth, unconsciously acting jealous of normal people. And with the special innocence that children possess, she worshipped the perfect king. Given a helmet she was told never to remove in front of others, she was eventually sent to Camelot under Morgan's recommendation, and through a presentation of her own superb swordsmanship, became one of the Knights of the Round Table. She was given her sword despite her unknown origins because of her abilities and straightforward mental chivalry. She protected the way of the knights much like that which could only be found in picture books, working hard daily and being the ideal knight, all while hiding her dislike of others. In the end, even that innocence was shattered by Morgan, who revealed the secrets of her birth. She learned of her parentage and was told that the king didn't know either. Morgan tried to instill that the king would never accept such a filthy child, but she was, while shocked, wrapped in joy. While not a proper human being, sharing the same blood as the king, being the son of a superior king, she was proud of the fact that she was not human. She felt that in name, reality, mind, and body that she was fit to be the true successor of the King of Knights. She went without having the slightest feelings of rebellion, spurred on by the truth, and approached the king with delight. Raised without a father, the king was the very form of a godlike father to her. But Artoria rejected her very clearly. She said that, while Mordred is certainly born from her and her sister's plotting, that she will not recognize Mordred as her son or give her the throne. Mordred believed that it was all due to the king's hatred for Morgan, that it would be impossible for her son to be accepted, thinking that was the reason her title was the weakest, believing that no matter how hard she tried, even if she excelled over everyone, that the king would forever view her as a dirted child from the moment she was born from Morgan. Her great love for the king up until then made her hatred burn. Mordred began to use her magical power, and her characteristic heavy armor covered her body. In her right hand appeared her sword, Clarent, and she pointed it at Artoria. Artoria was not left behind, and she too began to circulate her magical power. Lighter armor appeared on what was once the uniform of a butler, and in her right hand lay the famous sword, Excalibur. Sigh. Artoria sighed unconsciously. How many times do I have to tell you? As much as your heavy armor intimidates, it is useless against opponents of great caliber. You should wear armor according to your short stature, Mordred. Shut up, Mordred shouted. You're nobody to tell me anything. You're just a fallen king. A twinge of pain passed through Artoria's face. Mordred's comment had hurt. Let's get this over with, Mordred, Artoria said. Let's end this damn battle. Yes, we agree on something, fallen king, Mordred replied from under her helmet. A second later, they both disappeared. Mordred lunged mercilessly at Artoria, delivering swift and powerful blows at the Night King. Although she has no refined style, I have to admit that her blows are more powerful than mine, Artoria thought as she deflected each and every one of Mordred's blows. The battle seemed to be advancing in slow motion in Draco's eyes, even though the two women were moving at exorbitant speeds. So this is a battle between servants, Irisviel muttered. I can hardly see any movement. Yes, it's an interesting battle, Draco said. Can you see what is happening? Irisviel asked, pleasantly surprised. Of course, Draco smiled. Mordred wouldn't call me master if I wasn't strong enough. So that's how it is, Irisviel murmured. However, I did not expect Mordred to be like this. If Artoria is a girl, Mordred, who is her clone, is a girl, Draco responded. It would be strange if she were a boy in that case, wouldn't it? Is Mordred a clone? I thought because her parents are siblings, she looked so much like them, Irisviel commented. No, like you, Mordred is a homunculus. Draco resolved the Ainsburn woman's doubt. I see. Irisviel began to feel a kind of connection with Mordred. Actually, shouldn't Mordred be about the same age as Irisviel? As homunculi grow faster than humans, they have a shorter life expectancy than humans. However, physical growth does not mean mental maturity. She was just a child. Irisviel came to the realization of something. That's right, Mordred was only 9 years old when she found out that Artoria was her father. The same age she was when she was rejected by her, Draco said. The famous final battle that destroyed the Night King's Britannia was nothing more than the tantrum of a child who had been abandoned by her parents. Draco oversaw the battle. Mordred was the weakest of the knights of the Round Table for a reason. Even if her stats exceeded Artoria's, it was difficult to know if she could defeat the strongest saber or not. And the problem was even more remarkable when Artoria's stats were superior to Mordred's. Mordred. Race: human/servant, homunculus. Status: normal. LV: 49 out of 100. Strength: 7,063. Defense: 4,594. Magic: 4,055. Agility: 3,929. Artoria. Race: human/servant. Status: normal. LV: 50 out of 100. Strength: 6,951. Defense: 8,688. Magic: 8,688. Agility: 8,688. Why did Artoria have more level than Mordred? And her stats were overwhelmingly superior. Draco already knew that Artoria's parameters were far superior to Mordred's. He didn't expect her to double up on several of them. Fortunately, Mordred's armor was very powerful. It is said that even Tristan fired at Mordred's back, and she didn't even feel contact with her skin, and can even withstand Frankenstein's noble phantasm boosted by a command spell. But Artoria was beginning to gain the upper hand. Slowly, Mordred was forced to remain on the defensive, something she hated. Artoria was beginning to dominate the fight. But Draco had noticed something. "Mordred," Draco called her. "I'm busy, master," she shouted back. "I'm asking you to stay away from this. I just wanted to tell you that you don't have to hold back. You have nothing to hide." Inside her helmet, Mordred opened her eyes wide and smiled. Immediately, she took a few steps back and removed her helmet, showing her face to her opponent. "Okay, master," Mordred smiled. "This time, I'm going all out." Red lightning began to flow through Mordred's body, covering all the way to Clarent. Immediately, she fired at Artoria at a much higher speed than before. "What just happened?" Irisviel asked. "As long as Mordred hides her face, she can't show her true power," Draco said. "That is the curse of the girl who was forced to hide her face from others." Now, the fight between Mordred and Artoria had come to a head. As Artoria does, Mordred impregnates her body and her weapons with magical energy. In addition, once she takes off her helmet, she can raise the amount of magical power much higher. This is so high, it feels like the difference from a small stream to a jet of propulsion. Her increased physical strength is enough to overwhelm fighters with far greater power, and even fight on an equal footing with the King of Knights who surpasses her in stats. Artoria's physical power, which was already inferior to that of Mordred, was now causing the thrust of Draco's saber to gather momentum and slowly begin to overcome the battle. Unlike Artoria, Mordred cannot apply mana burst to her entire body. That's why her fighting style is different from that of the King of Knights. While Artoria keeps her mana burst at its maximum constantly, Mordred applies it for surprise attacks at maximum power. Considering Mordred's fighting style, similar to that of a Berserker, the use of mana burst by Mordred is really problematic for her opponents. You never know when she will use her full power. "Are you sure you're a saber class?" Artoria asked as they fought. "I've never been more sure," Mordred replied as she cut violently with her sword. Artoria frowned. This fight was really problematic. Unlike the rest of heroic spirits, she had never stepped foot in the throne of heroes. Therefore, she was unaware of Mordred's fame or any of her noble phantasms. The only information she had about Mordred was what she knew when she was alive. But those data were not very reliable at this time. Mordred's style had not changed one bit. That wild style would never go out of Artoria's mind. Of all the knights at the Round Table, Mordred was the worst in terms of swordplay, but at the same time, she killed the most enemies. Artoria would never forget how Mordred went into battle on her own while slaughtering the enemies of Britain. It was the skill of mana burst and instinct that had guided Artoria all her life, and Mordred, her clone, was no different. Morgan had done a good job, As much as Artoria did not like Morgan's objective, her noble phantasm should be that armor and sword Clarent. But Mordred could have some card of triumph that she had achieved with her fame. But there was something that really had changed in Mordred, and there was no way that Artoria had overlooked it. For her, who had signed the contract with Aleia at the very moment of Mordred's death, only about 2 weeks had passed since her fight to the death with her son. And while the strength levels hadn't deviated much, there was one thing that had: Mordred's skill with the sword. While Mordred was the least skilled knight with a sword, the same could not now be said. At the Battle of Camlin, it seemed that Mordred had been training in the art of the sword for less than 5 years. However, she was now much better than before. Artoria could no longer predict her attacks as easily, nor could she defend herself from her movements as she had done 2 weeks earlier. Although to say that it was more than a millennium ago was better said. It seemed that she had been training for many years, but it should not have been possible by following the rules of the Holy Grail War. No, they had previously claimed that they were external agents. Therefore, she could have been summoned much earlier. But this was not the time to think about that. It didn't matter if Mordred was stronger or weaker. It didn't matter how long Mordred had been summoned. It only mattered that she was victorious in this fight, as she had always been, because she was the king who did not know defeat. Her sword said so. Excalibur, sword of promised victory. Saber is having a tough time, Irisviel commented slightly. Although, as much as she wanted to appear calm, she obviously wasn't. The variable known as Mordred and her master, who had not yet given his name, was something Kiritsugu had not considered. Irisviel, who knew Kiritsugu's meticulous plans, knew that this strange and unexpected variable that had appeared out of nowhere could make these plans fall apart. Are you really willing to die for someone else's dream that you know is going to fail? Huh. Irisviel didn't expect Draco's question, as sudden as it was shocking. For a moment, thinking about what Draco had said before, Irisviel really wondered if a dream destined to be thwarted was worth dying for. But she finally shook her head. A pitiful smile appeared on her beautiful face. I am destined to die, no matter what my wishes are, she said. My death is inevitable. That being the case, I prefer to give my life for the person I love and his ideals. Draco nodded. That was the answer he expected from Irisviel. Even if that dream ends up destroying the lives of the 2 people you love, he asked slightly. What do you mean? Irisviel didn't hesitate to grab Draco's arm. Explain yourself, please. Draco sighed and pulled Irisviel aside to look at her better in the eyes. Her crimson pupils really did look like rubies. Do you think old Einsburn will let Kiritsugu into the castle if he fails? Draco watched in amazement as the little color in Irisviel's skin faded. How do you think Ilia would react? Draco asked again, not giving Irisviel time to respond. In 10 years, the Holy Grail will call a war again. I think it goes without saying who the Einsburns would send to participate in this war, who would become the next sacrifice. And how do you think Kiritsugu would feel about not being able to see his daughter again? For 5 years, he will visit the castle several times each year only to be turned away. Afterward, he will die without being able to talk to his daughter once more. Thud! Irisviel fell to her knees. If everything this stranger said was true, then Ilia could not escape from the destiny of being a homunculus created by the Einsburns either. Everything she and Kiritsugu had planned, trained, and sacrificed for was going to fail. All for nothing. It can't be, she muttered. Her eyes sank into a dark pit of despair. For a moment, she saw herself reflected in the dark well. As if in a mirror, a version of her dressed in dark clothes looked at her with a sadistic smile. A chill ran through Irisviel's body. What this man was saying was right. That person she was seeing was real, and he was inside her. He was the manifestation of the corruption of the Grail. The god created for the sins of mankind, all the world's evils. Ungrammenu. Could she escape this darkness? Irisviel could not take her eyes off her counterpart. It was inevitable that they would attract each other, as if they were 2 opposing poles. But something blocked her vision. Something cut the connection between the 2 magnets. It was a hand. Irisviel raised her head to see the person who had extended his hand to her, finding a smile that was not much different from that of her counterpart, but that had strangely calmed all her anxiety. I have a way to save yours and your daughter's life. No one knew Mordred's weaknesses better than she did. Her skill with the sword was inferior to that of the other knights of the Round Table. She knew this very well. Gawain defeated her easily, even when they fought in the night. That's why she had developed that brutal style, where her skill with the sword did not decide victory or defeat. Still, Mordred knew that this was very important. Years ago, when Draco gave Mordred permission to travel to the territory that was once known as Britain, she met a boy named Arthur Pendragon. He was a descendant of the Pendragon family, although Mordred did not know who. Probably, since this world was different from his, he really was the descendant of the Real Arthur Pendragon. For Mordred, this was not really important. All she thought at the time was that she had a cute little brother and a cute little sister, even though she hated that Lufay shared part of her mother's name. Mordred, trying to prove her skills as a big sis, challenged Arthur to a fight, which, obviously, ended with Mordred winning. But she knew better than anyone else that, if their strength levels were the same, there was no way she could have defeated Arthur. His skill with the sword was exquisite, perhaps at the level of Gawain and Lancelot. No, perhaps he was even superior. If the Arthur Pendragon that Mordred had known in the world of DxD was the true son of the Arthur Pendragon of Mordred's world, there was no doubt that Britain would not have fallen that way. At first, Mordred was a bit down in the dumps thinking about this. But she soon realized that this was an opportunity, a chance to improve and get to the next step. During the time Mordred was in England, she was challenging him daily under the guise of helping Arthur improve. Of course, not forgetting Chiron's training, to which Arthur contributed. Even when she returned to Japan, she never stopped training. And once Draco gained the skill with the sword, her training intensified greatly. Speaking of that skill, blessing of martial arts, it was really annoying that her master could use the sword better than she could by only receiving one skill. Not only that, but he had even greater skill in any kind of martial art. Thanks to the blessing of martial arts skill, Draco now had the knowledge of the Ramayana's protagonist, one of the two major epic poems from India. This is none other than Rama, one of the reincarnations of the god Vishnu. Mordred was really grateful that her master had such good skills, as she took advantage of it for much better. In a short period of time, both had improved a lot. Mordred had elevated her swordsmanship skills, while Draco had become accustomed to Rama's ability. Now it was time to demonstrate that improvement. If there was anyone Mordred could not lose to, it was the king who had never known defeat. Meanwhile, Irisviel was watching Draco's hand. Unconsciously, she extended her hand to Draco, ready to accept his proposal. But all this was too sudden. Irisviel stepped back and rose gently, just as a noble lady would. "I see." Draco nodded, understanding Irisviel's intentions. "I apologize for my appearance earlier." Irisviel bowed elegantly to him. "Please let me consider your proposal. I am sure I will be able to give you a satisfactory answer." "I hope so." Draco nodded before turning his head in the completely opposite direction. "By the way, what should we do with that one there? An enemy servant?" "Yes." Unconsciously, Irisviel had stopped considering Draco an enemy. Draco had already detected a presence approaching, but it had stopped about 100 meters away. It seemed that the stealth that Draco was using to cover the fight between Mordred and Artoria could only be hidden up to this point. Obviously, Draco knew who this person was. Lancer should have felt Artoria's presence, as servants summoned by the Holy Grail can be felt more easily by each other. Mordred had been able to hide from Artoria because her body was physical, while the servants are still spiritual manifestations. "It seems that he wants to join the fight," Draco commented. "But it seems to me that this does not benefit either of us." Letting Mordred show her appearance to Irisviel and Artoria was because they were going to recognize the servant anyway. It made no sense to limit Mordred's abilities while fighting an opponent who already knew her identity. How bold. Does he really dare to interrupt this fight? Without a trace of tension in her voice, Irisviel remained calm as she responded. It seemed that even after seeing Mordred's power, she still had faith in Artoria. He seeks a fight, but his personality does not allow him to interrupt a battle between two knights. In that respect, he is similar to Artoria. Draco turned his gaze to the fight, which did not seem to have a quick outcome. In a battle like this, the first one to make a mistake will be the one who dies. And this time, Artoria didn't have the sacred spear to kill Mordred easily. "Mordred, stop," Draco said slightly. "Huh?" Irisviel looked at Draco in surprise. Was he going to distract Mordred at such a key moment in the battle? That could end in the death of the servant. "Yes, master." Contrary to Irisviel expectations, Mordred stepped back easily. The helmet that had earlier been removed from her armor reappeared, covering her face once again. "Don't be surprised. Neither of them was fighting with the intention of killing," Draco explained to Irisviel. But Irisviel was sure that she had felt a strong intention to kill from the very first moment. "Your experience is very limited, Irisviel. You have to learn to differentiate between the intention to kill and the intention to fight to the death." Both were willing to die in this fight, but neither really wanted to kill the other one. Irisviel looked at the two servants, who were approaching them after Draco ended the fight. Artoria had also ended the fight once Mordred had retired, returning to normal. "So, shall we accept the challenge?" Mordred asked as she looked in the direction of Lancer's presence. "Yes, I'm going to take it," Draco responded. So I'm going to fight another servant," Mordred muttered. "No, I'm going to fight." They all looked at Draco in surprise, except for Mordred. She was the only one who knows her master's power, after all. He only smiled. "I'm not so weak. I can fight a servant without a problem." As Draco and company advanced in the direction of Lancer, the rest of the servants and masters prepared to make their appearance at the Holy Grail War. One of the main events was about to begin. The west corner of the park by the sea is prolonged by a run of boring warehouses. The block, which had a port layout, also had a wall separating the eastern industrial area from Shinto. At night, pedestrian traffic ceases, and street lights shine uselessly on the asphalt, even as the scene becomes even more empty. Unmanned cranes return towards the dark sea, like a fantastic group of enormous fossilized dinosaurs. Certainly, this is an appropriate place for servants who must face it hidden from public view. The group reached the place where the enemy was finally showing himself, without fleeing or hiding. The tall shadow standing in the middle of the empty street emitted an extraordinary amount of prana, clearly showing that he was much more than human. "Mordred, protect Irisviel." "All right, master. We will observe for the time being," Irisviel said. Draco stepped forward while the other three lagged behind. Facing each other, the two were barely 10 meters apart. Finally, this was the first real fight Draco was going to have against a servant. Now it was time to determine if he could compare himself to a normal servant. Artoria doesn't count as a normal servant. Therefore, Draco did not hesitate to use the Inspect status skill. Diarmuid Ua Duibni. Race: Heroic Spirit/Servant. LV: 50 out of 100. Strength: 4,665. Defense: 3,498. Magic: 2,332. Agility: 11,662. As expected, Lancer, like Artoria, was level 50. However, as Draco expected, he was much weaker than Artoria in terms of stats. Except for that terrifying agility, all of his statistics were unimpressive. Although if this Diarmuid were in DxD, he would be considered a very powerful existence. After all, that agility is on the level of the gods. But Lancer should never reach this level of power in Naciverse. This was all because of the arrangement Sage had made. Although Draco didn't know how that entity had achieved it, it was probably something the old man had left behind. The power levels of this world had increased more than Draco had expected. But that was okay. No, in fact, it was perfect. With the agreement Draco had reached with Sage, not only was he going to gain much more experience from being the enemy much stronger than it should be, but all that experience was going to be multiplied by 2. Focusing on his opponent, Draco watched him carefully. Diarmuid was a handsome man with long, fickle hair combed backward. The spear next to him, about 6 feet tall and even taller than himself, was one of his noble phantasms, Guy Dirge. His other noble phantasm, Guy Bid, was being carried by his left hand. This one was a little shorter, about 1.40 meters. The two spears were tightly clipped from the handle to the tip with a cloth that looked like an amulet, hiding the shaft. This is the countermeasure to avoid revealing the noble Phantasm's true name. The spears, being longer than their backs, are usually used with both hands. Although if a two-sword style could be used, especially if they're short, it is very rare to find someone who uses two spears to fight. The two-spear style, taking into account that both are noble Phantasm, and the effects that these noble Phantasm have, together with Diarmuid's high agility, make him an opponent capable of facing Artoria without not many problems. Although, if she were to use her characteristic noble Phantasm, there would be no doubt that Diarmuid would be reduced to ashes. It is good that you come. All the servants who were walking in the city today have only cowered far away. You are the only ones brave enough to respond to my invitation. Although Diarmuid was speaking to Draco, his attention was focused on Artoria. It seems that he wanted to fight the servant, and the others did not matter. I must disappoint you, Lancer, but your fight is not with the servant back there, but with me. Diarmuid frowned. Besides, it is a mole you have that would influence too much a battle against a woman. Would you not rather have a fair fight against a man? Draco's arrogant and provocative smile was a lethal weapon he had. It was nothing more than his natural smile, but his own nature influenced that smile so that it could only be interpreted in one way. With his smile, Draco showed the world that no one is important enough to him. Only the Nephilim dragon rose to the top. Oh, so you want a fair battle? It is my honor to face such a proud opponent, even though he is not as strong as a servant. Exaggerating, Lancer responded with a quiet smile. It was a smile that is only for those who desire a perfectly frontal life and death battle. What are you doing, Lancer? An amplified voice was heard throughout the place. Don't worry, Master. I will finish this man quickly and begin my battle against the servant. The voice did not respond to Diarmuid's words, indicating that he agreed. Draco only smiled. He did not think well of a master who was hiding from the battle. Although there are several such masters in this war, at least this master was not so contemptible with Tosaka and Kirai. Well, there wasn't a master that Draco liked in this war. Although Waver Velvet is the exception. You seem to be underestimating me, Lancer, Draco commented. Maybe you should be a little more careful. You are certainly strong, Diarmuid acknowledged, but you are not on the level of the servants. Draco, human form. Race, Great Dragon King. LV, 118 out of 250. Strength, 1,612. Defense, 1,425. Magic, 1,787. Agility, 3,000. As Diarmuid said, Draco's stats in his human form were quite inferior to those of a servant. But that was without using his boosters. By catalyzing the most powerful flames, Scathe of Branches, the name of this ability was changed after reaching the Lost Belt in the FGO of NA, formerly Branch Destruction. Around his entire body, Draco doubled his physical capabilities. Thus, he achieved the power he should have in his dragon form. Feeling the increased power in Draco's body, everyone except Mordred was surprised. Now, he could be considered a weak servant in terms of statistics. But this was not all. Channeling his Tuki, Draco again amplified his statistics by 80%. This was thanks to his training, as he had managed to raise his skill to level 8. But that wasn't all. Draco's body shone, and black armor appeared covering his body. His previous casual clothes had completely disappeared, leaving the armor covering his entire body except for his neck and head. That's dragon scales? Artoria asked when she saw the armor. I don't know, Mordred responded. Master had never shown me that armor before. A glow appeared in Draco's right hand, and a sword appeared in his hand. The sword, though it seemed to be dull, seemed perfect in Draco's hands. Who exactly is he? Artoria murmured. All equipped and ready for battle, Draco stepped forward with his arrogant smile. Then, we can start at any time. Lifting the long spear on his right shoulder and turning it once, Lancer raised the short spear's tip in his left hand. His posture, extending both spears like wings, was truly an unpredictable style. Draco's fighting spirit also boiled to the point that he seemed to explode. The whole aura surrounding the dragon was shaking violently. His eyes dilated, taking on a snake-like appearance. What is this feeling of closeness? From a distance, Artoria observed the aura surrounding Draco. She, who had not thought much about Mordred's master, was beginning to pay more and more attention to this man. Draco turned his head to look in the three girls' direction, but his eyes were only on Mordred. She was standing there with her arms crossed and a wide smile on her face. Her attitude and posture said, "Master is going to win. There's no way he's going to lose." But Draco knew her better than anyone else. Perhaps only Chiron or Kuroko would understand Mordred to the level that Draco did. She looked tense, and her smile looked a little forced. The confidence she had in Draco was not false, and she really thought he was going to win. However, that didn't stop her from worrying about him. Draco was facing a servant, a heroic spirit. In other words, he was facing one of the greatest warriors to ever appear in this world. A single slip-up in front of a character of this caliber would be fatal to anyone. Draco could see everything that Mordred was thinking at this moment with one look. Such was the level of bonding between this pair of master and servant. And in response to that, "One thumb up, Master," Mordred muttered. She realized that Draco had seen through her, and she understood what he was trying to convey with his gesture. Everything is controlled. That was the message Draco was sending to Mordred. And Draco never lied. After receiving the signal sent by Irisviel, Amiya, Kiritsugu, and his own Maya ran to the factories according to their direction. They were welcomed by a quiet stretch of silence. Only the howling of the sea reached their ears, in an atmosphere as still and stagnant as death. Anyway, it has already begun. Only by the traces of prana/mana in the surroundings, Kiritsugu was able to judge precisely the situation. Someone had formed a barrier. It must have been the work of the enemy's master. His goal was to segregate ordinary humans from Heaven's Field by sealing off the war's real battlefield. It is a mandatory measure for magicians to prevent their activities from being exposed to other mortals. Kiritsugu began to contemplate while holding the sniper rifle. He had already estimated Irisviel's position according to the transmitter. However, there were still problems regarding how he would approach the position and observe from whence they arrived. He didn't think about joining the battle at all. That's why he was carrying the sniper rifle. He wanted to inspect the battle from a suitable location, attacking with the rifle only when necessary. Servants are not human, and only a servant can wound another servant. No matter how powerful the firearms of Kiritsugu and Mia, they would not serve the servants. It is the work of Saber how to fight the opposing servant. As soon as the enemy devotes himself to his fight and pays no attention to the welfare of his master, there it is possible to win this fight. Up there, that seems a good place to observe the fight. Mia pointed to the front of them as she spoke. It's a crane that was rising high in the night. Judging by the view, the control booth was floating about 100 feet above the ground. It would be the best possible observation point if one could manage to silently climb up there. Kiritsugu had no objection to Mia's suggestion, but just for that, he shook his head. Yes, that's the ideal place to watch the battle. So it shouldn't be just us who have come across that idea. Without further explanation from Kiritsugu, Mia had already understood his intentions. Mia, you slide across the east bank. I will go from the west. Find an observation point that can watch both the battle of Saber and the crane. Got it? Mia disappeared into the factory shadows on a trot, holding the August assault rifle in her hands. Kiritsugu checked the transmitter entrance while moving cautiously in the opposite direction. Irisviel had quickly contacted Kiritsugu when Draco and Mordred had shown up in front of her in Artoria. As she had not spoken directly to him through the communicator, Kiritsugu knew nothing about the current situation. He thought that Artoria would be fighting an enemy servant. However, this was not so. How will Kiritsugu react when he learns that a variable like Draco appears before his eyes? So this is what a real fight to the death is all about. All Irisviel could do was watch the battle in front of her in awe as she reflected on the words Draco had left her before. Your experience is very limited, Irisviel. You have to learn to differentiate between the intention to kill and the intention to fight to the death. Both were willing to die in this fight, but neither really wanted to kill the other one. Those were the words Draco had said before, and now it was time for Irisviel to reflect on it. The intensity of this fight was totally different from the previous one. It's not as if the previous fight between Mordred and Artoria wasn't impressive, but the atmosphere itself was very different. At the beginning of the fight, the mysterious man, called Draco, had shown a brutal smile before disappearing. Yes, he did disappear. The next thing Irisviel knew, she had to grab Artoria's arm to keep from flying away. If it were merely a collision between weapons, Irisviel would not have overthought it. But what could be the powerful torrent of air that accompanied him and threatened to destroy everything in sight? How could the footsteps crush the asphalt? How could the wind generated by the weapons cut the poles crudely in half? They were both even faster than Mordred and Artoria. If before she could see some of what was happening on the previous battlefield, now she could see nothing but the ground falling apart. The layers of iron peeling off the warehouse's outer walls were blown away by the wind from Irisviel's side, like a piece of twisted tin. She couldn't understand how the iron could fly out. The wind was groaning. Faced with an utterly indifferent dimension to the physical laws of this world, the air was emitting paranoid howls. A chaotic storm was raging on the empty commercial street, destroying and trampling all things in it. Only the hand-to-hand combat between the two would be enough to ruin an entire street. So this is Heaven's Feel? Irisviel was experiencing the fear and wonder told only in stories. The world where the myths and legends dwelt lay vividly before her eyes. This could be the rebirth of legends. Lines of lightning separated the sky. Hills of thundering waves broke the earth. The imaginary realm was miraculously materialized with startling clarity. This is the war between servants. Faced with a world that she had not yet considered possible, all Irisviel could do was look on paralyzed. Simultaneously, Draco had a feeling of satisfaction that he hadn't felt for many months. The training he had with the three servants were nothing more than pieces of training. They could not be compared to real fights. If Draco, remembered correctly, was late in the last one to make him feel this way, this feeling, Draco couldn't forget it. The feeling that he could be killed at any moment. Diarmuid was really talented, a servant worthy of putting Artoria through a lot of trouble in the show. Draco thought that he shouldn't have much trouble facing Diarmuid if he concentrated on the Guy Dirge. However, Draco had underestimated the abilities of this servant. With a strength inferior to Draco's defense, Lancer should not be able to harm Draco. However, this could only be considered if Lancer fought with his fists. His noble phantasms were both rank B, so they could certainly get through Draco's skin. But with the armor he was carrying right now, Guy Bid was utterly useless. With the armor covering all of Draco's body except his face, Guy Bid was destined to fail. Despite being a noble phantasm of rank B, it could not pass through Draco's armor. Too bad Draco still didn't have the strength to extend the armor all the way, creating a helmet to cover his face as well. This way, he wouldn't even have to worry about surprise attacks from the back of an archer or an assassin. Still, he could not easily penetrate Lancer's defenses. What's the matter, kid? Although I must say I'm surprised at your strength. Your attacks don't seem to be working. Draco did not return Lancer's provocations. He frowned as he thought about how to overcome the barrier in front of him. With a long spear, Lancer defended himself against any attack Draco tried to use. In one battle, the spear had the advantage over the sword because of the difference in size, and Diarmuid had two spears. Although Guy Bid was only a short spear, the same size as an ordinary sword, he was still a danger to Draco. The effect of Guy Bid was to reduce the maximum HP of a target, and this was something that Draco wanted to avoid. Although Draco knew that this weapon could not pierce his armor, his face was still exposed. It wasn't as if he could really ignore the spear altogether. Without waiting for Draco's response, Lancer brandished the spear in his right hand, Guy Dirge, the long spear, and ran straight at him. Lancer held the spear in his right hand and approached Draco, running directly. The swinging edge covered a wide area. Its strength and speed equaled that which could be reached with two hands. No, precisely because it was used with one hand, there were many movements that were not possible when a spear was used conventionally with both hands could be shown when it was wielded with only one hand. However, a spear has its own limitations. Given its length, it would inevitably show an opening between two attacks. During this time, the shorter spear on the left could continue and make Draco uncomfortable. But Draco already knew this pattern. He had seen it countless times in the anime. The fight between Artoria and Diarmuid was some of the best animated battle choreography ever seen. Draco, as a Good Fate fan, had seen it countless times. Right now, Draco was in a position not too different from Artoria's. However, there were a couple of details that differed between the two. In the original battle, Artoria was unaware of Diarmuid's noble Phantasm, and Lancer was unaware of the length of the saber-class servant sword. However, in this battle, both opponents knew these details. But, since both knew the details of their opponent, the battle was also close to a stalemate. The problem was that even knowing the pattern of Diarmuid's attack, Draco could not advance carelessly. A single mistake, and he would pay dearly for it. Lancer is strong. That was Draco's honest assessment. It wasn't like the battle he had with Layden. Back then, both dragons were fighting to see who could last the longest in receiving attacks without dying. However, the current fight could be decided with one move. If Lancer pierced Draco's heart or cut off his head, there was no doubt that he would die. The same could be said for Lancer. If Draco managed to land a blow, Lancer would die. But Draco wasn't the only one evaluating his opponent. How can he fool this kid? Diarmuid had already observed that the boy's speed was not less than his own, and he could not gain a real advantage in battle despite carrying two spears. He had already tried several times to trick Draco with Gib Dirge, so that he could use Gib Bid to deliver a deadly blow to the boy. However, whenever he tried this, it seemed that the boy was willing to go all out for a counterattack. He practically ignored Gib Bid. The boy was confident that this armor would protect him from Gib Bid. But where did that confidence come from? No matter what, Lancer had this feeling of constant danger. There was no doubt that if the boy made one impact, he was going to die. This kid is strong. The murderous intention that both emitted created an overwhelming pressure that made it difficult for people with high magical abilities like Irisviel, or the rest of the people who watched the battle from the shadows, to breathe. I understand that Lancer has such a killing intent, but how can your master show something like that, being a person who was born in these peaceful years? Artoria was curious about this person, so she took this opportunity to ask Mordred. You don't understand anything about Master, Mordred said proudly. Master's strength is the result of having wiped out all his enemies. When I knew him, he was even weaker than your false master. Mordred nodded to Irisviel, pointing out that Draco was even weaker than she was back then, compared to the young man who could maintain Lancer's speed and fight on the same level as a servant. Both Artoria and Irisviel could not believe how someone so strong could be so weak. How long have you been summoned? Artoria did not hesitate to ask Mordred. Perhaps because of the connection between the two, she had no problem in talking frankly with Mordred, even though it was her daughter who took her life. Mordred thought about it and began to recount internally. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's been about 4 years. I see. Artoria nodded her head. You have grown a lot during this time. Good job. Artoria was thinking of the Mordred who had always looked at her with hatred since a certain incident. Many times, she did not even bother to hide the hostility she felt toward Artoria. Artoria couldn't have a decent conversation with Mordred in those days. Perhaps it was Artoria's inability to understand people's hearts, and therefore her inability to communicate with her subordinates by showing any emotion had put a barrier between her and Mordred. Perhaps if things had been spoken of calmly at that time, but one could not go back in time. Looking at today's Mordred, Artoria could hardly recognize the one who at one time was his subordinate. Her explosive character remained intact, but she seemed much calmer than before. She no longer showed hostility and hatred as before, even though it was obvious that Artoria was not to Mordred's liking. Without a doubt, Mordred had grown up a lot. For years, Artoria knew Mordred's history well. When Mordred introduced herself to Artoria as her son, Only 9 years had passed since Morgan had taken Artoria's semen. However, a 16-year-old girl with a face identical to her had been shown in front of her. Perhaps if Artoria had treated Mordred differently. Artoria understood this later, when Merlin explained to her that homunculi were growing much faster than humans. That meant that Mordred was now 13 years old. Perhaps if Artoria had given Mordred more time to mature. No, it didn't make sense to keep thinking about possible futures that could have prevented the tragedy. Artoria would have thought more about that when she got the Holy Grail. At least she now knew that she had more options to save Britain than the sword and the stone test. While Artoria thought about Mordred, the latter was shocked by the words of her father. "You have grown a lot during this time. Good job." Artoria's words echoed in Mordred's mind. For some strange reason unknown to the Draco's servant, her heart began to beat violently. Fortunately for her, her face was hidden behind her helmet, preventing Artoria and Irisviel from seeing her shameful appearance. To be flattered by Artoria, Mordred had never experienced anything like this before. Draco and Diarmuid were going at it all, not directing thoughts to the world around them. Even Draco's presence detection had been restricted to a circumference of 10 meters, just enough to have the time to defend against a surprise attack. This was so he could have 100% concentration on the fight with Diarmuid. At this point, when Draco could not find a way to get past Diarmuid's defense, he thought about using magic. However, he soon rejected this idea. Diarmuid's long spear, Gi Dirge, had the ability to nullify magic. He could even nullify Artoria's noble phantasm, Invisible Air. One could say that the few long-distance spells Draco had were useless against Lancer. While the two fought, the guests were gathering at the site of the battle. Without them noticing, and using his special skill, Assassin hid in the perfect spot to watch the frontal battle, the crane that loomed near the cliff. The location was about 500 meters away from the skirmish. Like a servant with eyesight beyond that of a human, he could clearly discern the conflict between the two, even distinguishing their expressions with precision. Meanwhile, the two fighters barely had time to consider whether they were being spied upon. Or so Assassin and his master, Kiritsugu, thought. Draco already knew what was going to happen, and of course, he knew that Assassin was not dead yet. Assassin's presence in this place was already known to Draco, even if he hadn't felt his aura there. In turn, Draco knew that, thanks to Kiritsugu's clever decision to avoid moving towards the crane to observe the battle, Artoria's master would discover the truth about Assassin. Assassin could have remained in his spiritual form and obtained information from a much closer distance. But as long as he was in spiritual form, his senses would have remained spiritual detection, and the job his master had given him tonight was observe with your eyes. Assassin, who understood his master's intentions, silently observed the battle in the distance according to his orders. Although, perhaps, if he had remained in his spiritual form, Kiritsugu would not have detected his presence. That way, Kirai and Tokiomi would have had a better chance of winning the war according to their original plans. It didn't matter, though, as Draco wouldn't let either of them escape alive. Meanwhile, 15 kilometers away, inside the Fuyuki church base, Kodomine Kirai was watching the battle through Assassin's eyes. Everything that Assassin observed with his own eyes could be reproduced in Kirai's mind. They were sharing the same vision. Using only a prana connection, he was able to share senses with the one with whom he established a contract. In Heaven's Feel, the ability to fully monitor a servant's actions over long distances is very useful. If one servant is Assassin, who is specially trained in the recognition, then the ability is unparalleled. The only difficulty lies in the fact that if the hired one does not agree with it, the skill cannot be used. For Tokiomi, who was the same one who taught Kirai this magical technique, his suggestions were immediately rejected by Archer. To the haughty king of heroes, even if he were his master, allowing another to see through his eyes seemed highly unlikely. Therefore, the only ones who could achieve this were Kirai and Assassin. Something is happening by the warehouses by the Mayan River estuary. It seems that the initial battle has begun. Kirai spoke, but there was no one in the dark. Instead, there was an antique phonograph on a table, its bronze horn leaning towards Kirai. As expected, The ordinary ancient phonograph responded to his words with a human voice. Not the initial one. Officially, it is the second battle, Kirii. Although the sound was rather distorted, the frank tone, full of composure, could only be the voice of Tosaka Tokiomi. It sounds like a battle between Lancer and someone else. The opponent seems to be Saber. Both are very powerful, although Saber's skills seem to be superior. Lancer doesn't even have the speed advantage. I see. There is no doubt that it is the most powerful class. Can you see the master? I can see 3 more people, a silver-haired woman standing behind Saber, a blonde-haired woman in light armor, and another person in heavy armor. The last 2 also have swords, and their aura is undoubtedly that of a servant. What do you mean? The truth is, though the boy who is fighting Lancer is powerful, he does not have the aura of a servant. However, he is so strong that there is no way he is not a servant. Perhaps he has some ability that allows him to hide his aura. Something similar occurs with the person in the armor. He has an aura similar to that of a servant, but is different at the same time. The only one who has the aura of a servant is the blonde girl in light armor. Inside Tosaka's mansion, Tokiomi was frowning from his office. This is more complicated than I thought. Wait, did you say there is also a silver-haired woman? Yes, a young Caucasian woman. Silver-haired with red eyes. She doesn't look very human. Tosaka Tokiomi was silent for a few moments, considering his next action. So the pawns of Jubstichite are not just limited to Emiya Kiritsugu. It's hard to believe that I actually predicted it wrong. For the first time in his life, a curious agitation arose in Kirii's chest. Within a few moments, he realized that it was, in fact, the emotion called disappointment. Within everything, that woman is the key to sustaining the flow of heaven's feel. Kirii, you must pay close attention. I understand. I will send someone to follow her at all times. Immediately after receiving those mysterious words, Kirii continued to watch the 2 heroic spirits resolutely. But even with the sparkling collisions of the blades, or the jumping outbursts of prana, Kirii's eyes did not have the sparkle they seemed to have just now. Looking from a distance with assassin's eyes, Kirii and Tokiomi had misunderstood 2 things. They believed that Draco was a servant because of his power, and they thought that he was most certainly the servant of the Saber class. Therefore, they thought that all those who stood by Irisviel belonged to the Einsburn faction. Although this could not be further from the truth. Although Kiritsugu did not understand what was happening, he at least understood that Irisviel had temporarily allied herself with the 2 strangers. In that case, he only had to look for Lancer's master. And he soon found his presence in the thermographic sight of his Walther, hidden in the roofs of the warehouses. Immersed in the darkness, Kiritsugu formed a disheartened smile. It was the best starting situation he could have wished for. Lancer's master probably relied on illusions such as the magic of presence concealment to hide his position and imagined that would be enough. He did not consider that this would be seen standing with mechanical cameras. Like all other magicians who died at the hands of Kiritsugu, he would walk the same path as they did to their destruction. Kiritsugu contacted Mia, located on the other side of the battlefield, with his radio. Mia, Lancer's master, is hiding at the top of the warehouses, northeast of where Saber is. Can you see him? No. From my position, it is a blind spot. If possible, Kiritsugu wanted to cooperate with Mia to ensure the accuracy of the crossfire attack. Unfortunately, only Kiritsugu can fire at the moment. But it wouldn't be a problem as the distance is only 300 meters. Kiritsugu's skills would have taken the life of his target with a single bullet. As long as he remains unaware of the sniper's presence, no mage can defend himself from a round of a Magnum Winchester .300. Adjusting the bipod, Kiritsugu had begun to get into the mood. Kiritsugu stopped thinking and aimed the Walther at the top of the cranes. At that moment, he felt that all his plans had been ruined. As he held this disappointment in his chest, Kiritsugu whispered again into the radio. Mia, on the crane? Yes, affirmative here too. It's just what you think. It seems that the figure seen by Kiritsugu through the night vision glasses was captured by the sight of Mia's August assault rifle as well. Meanwhile, The third guest, who was scrutinizing the battle between Saber and Lancer, also discovered the silhouette on the crane. It was a completely unexpected event. In the War of the Holy Grail, one would logically remain on the sidelines instead of ardently joining the battle. A cunning master would not interfere even if other servants jumped into the fight, but would choose to continue to observe the struggle. Jumping after the outcome of a conflict would also be a very good idea. Even if one is not so fortunate, it would at least allow one to learn about the conditions of the enemy. Kiritsugu, who arrived first on the scene of battle, never thought that this fight would have a single team of observers. So he had given up the best position on the crane and chosen a place that could watch over it and the battlefield. The newcomer seemed to be unaware that his location was already under surveillance, and he occupied the ideal place to observe the fight. Consequently, he was exposed to Kiritsugu's field of vision. However, an important factor was escaping his calculations. Kiritsugu once again stared at the pale green figure through his lens. It was an observer he had not seen before, completely covered by a mantle of pure black and a skull mask over his face. Although it's hard to believe, it's definitely Assassin, the one who was annihilated the night before Tosaka's residence. Kiritsugu, who was not satisfied by the images recorded by Mia's relatives, was not completely surprised by the reappearance of the supposedly dead assassin. Putting aside the oddity of the situation, the problem was that the one who was currently on top of the crane is a servant. If Kiritsugu shot the master of Lancer now, the opponent would be dead instantly, but at the same time would also expose the position of the shooter. Although Assassin is not a class with a decisive fighting force, he is anyway a supernatural being, a servant. As a magician, Kiritsugu would never manage to win in such a battle. He could not expect Saber to help him. Considering the distance between Saber and him, Assassin was much closer to him. Besides, Saber wasn't even aware that Kiritsugu was on the scene. He couldn't expect her to come to his aid. At the same time, Saber was dedicated to protecting Irisviel from the two strangers. Even now, they didn't know why they're working together or what is their real objective. Only one thing remained: the seals of command. The authority of the command seals is not limited to the scope of the servant's powers. When the servant agrees to the master's order without resistance, the command seal can have effects beyond the servant's potential and achieve a miracle. It would not be impossible to transport Saber instantly to the position of Kiritsugu to keep Assassin at bay. But that would leave the helpless Irisviel directly in front of Lancer and the two strangers. Kiritsugu thought incessantly, combining various elements, and finally came to a conclusion. Although it would be an ideal opportunity to finish off Lancer's master, he would have to let him go for the night. Since that was decided, he would have no reason to doubt anything else. Mia, you keep an eye on Assassin. I'll watch Lancer. I understand. Kiritsugu sighed mutely, lowered the Walther's bipod, and proceeded to calmly observe the scene through the lens. Since he decided to give up this opportunity, Saber's effort tonight was already completely wasted. If she could restrain herself from showing her noble phantasm, or escape immediately with Irisviel, then he would have to grant her thanks. But she was a proud and arrogant heroic spirit, and those possibilities were only his guesses. Anyway, it would not be a bad idea to see, even once, how capable his subordinate really is. At least, at this moment, Artoria had not fought yet. The fewer people who see how capable the servant of Kiritsugu is, the greater the chances of victory in this war. Besides, he can gather data from strangers. They weren't in the data he had gathered these years, so he didn't know anything about them. Kiritsugu couldn't proceed with this war without knowing his opponent. The confrontation between Draco and Lancer had reached an impasse. From the very beginning, Diarmuid's goal was to test his opponent's limits. Lancer was careful, studying the extent of his opponent's abilities. Without a doubt, both his physical skills and his swordplay were at the highest level. Diarmuid was unaware of how his aura had immediately changed from slightly stronger than the average person to one that could fight him without any problem. Draco's goal was even simpler. He already knew Diarmuid's skills, so there was no need to test what Lancer's skills were. Draco's real goal was nothing more than to prove himself. What are his current limits, his reaction speed, the power behind his attacks? In general, Draco wanted an opponent who could bring out his new strength. He wanted to see how much he had grown in this time. Whether or not to kill Diarmuid was secondary. After all, with the noble phantasm he possessed, killing the servants of this holy grail war wasn't complicated at all. Only Artoria and Gilgamesh were a problem for him. Although, Draco doubted that the two of them would resist his trump card. That attack reduced Layden to ashes along with all his barriers. Not to mention that same attack was now much more powerful than before. Of course, even if this was only a test for the two fighters, we are talking about people with stats that rival that of gods on DxD. And that was shown in the buildings around them. The avenue was a miserable wreck of scars carved as a result of the battle. 2 warehouses had already collapsed, and 100 square meters of asphalt was in pieces. Turned into a battlefield, it was almost as if an earthquake had happened. In the midst of that disaster, even without a single scratch, Draco and Diarmuid looked at each other, preparing their next move. Neither showed signs of exhaustion. There is no honor in a battle without presentation, but Diarmuid began to talk to Draco. A resolution of death came from his 2 spears' tip. Only his gaze remained fresh. Anyway, I give you credit. To get to this point without showing a single drop of sweat, I feel bad for having underestimated you. Unnecessary modesty. I would have reacted the same way if I were in your place. Draco wasn't lying. If he were in the same position as Diarmuid, facing an opponent at least 5 times weaker than himself, Draco wouldn't have thought much of that opponent either. To be honest, I don't mind giving you my name. Raising his sword, Draco showed a big smile. Enough with this game, Lancer. Once again, the cold voice echoed through the room. Don't drag the fight any further. This is a formidable enemy. Do it quickly. You can show off your noble phantasm. At the words of Lancer's master, Draco could not help but smile even more. They were finally going to go all out. It was common sense that a servant could not show his noble phantasm without receiving the respective order from his master. Only a few of the archer class, like Gilgamesh, were free to use them at their pleasure because of their high level of independent action. The same was more or less true of the servants of Draco, but he had already given them their respective orders to use their noble phantasm if necessary. Understood, my master. Contrary to what he had shown of his character so far, Lancer quietly dropped his voice and changed the grip of his weapon. Without hesitation, he dropped the short spear in his left hand at his feet. Seeing this, Draco could not help but smile. This Lancer strategy was ineffective against him. Diarmuid detached himself from the amulet firmly tied around the long spear in his left hand. It was a deep crimson spear, totally different from before. Prana begins to rise from the tip of the spear like a threatening mirage. Now was the time when Lancer went all out. Draco was sure that now Diarmuid's noble phantasm was fully functioning. Unsure if the talisman surrounding the spears affected the noble phantasm's use, Draco had not dared to let it hit him before. Now, he was sure that with that spear of Diarmuid he was holding, Guy Dirge could pierce his armor. From here on, we're going to the final blow, stammered Lancer in a low voice, changing his stance to hold his lethal weapon in both hands. Draco simultaneously lowered his sword, measuring between him and Diarmuid with great caution. That Diarmuid had set the trap with Gibid was a big problem. Not because he had to be careful with the trap. Far from it. The problem was that now that Diarmuid was fighting with the only spear that could harm Draco, he couldn't use his strategy of taking advantage when Lancer attacked with Gibid to try to deal a blow. Also, as much as Diarmuid's strategy of using 2 spears was interesting and effective, you can only get the most out of a spear when you use both hands. In other words, although Lancer didn't know it, Draco now had it more complicated. On the other hand, exposing the noble phantasm can have 2 kinds of effects. One is demonstrating the vast power of a more deadly move of one's own while announcing its true name. For example, the attack Draco showed in front of Layden when he named Leviathan, soared like a sun that becomes a calamity. On the other hand, it may also be that the weapon already carries its noble phantasm nature. Draco did not have such a noble phantasm, but there was one person here who did. That was none other than Mordred, with her secret of pedigree. The use of this noble phantasm meant that enemies could not have information about Mordred. In this case, Lancer's red spear was similar to Mordred's. Guy Dirge, Crimson Rose of Exorcism. The spear will pierce directly through any projection made of magical energy, such as Artoria's summon armor. Bounded fields, such as invisible air, will have small fissures created that slowly chip away at them with each strike. Any weapon that is magically enhanced, such as those enhanced by Knight of Honor, will have its enhancements and ability boosts rendered useless when struck by the spear. And any item that acts as a magical energy source, such as Prelatized Spellbook, will have all too. Its recipient's connection severed. The nullification is not strong enough to cancel or break the source of the magecraft, making it unable to sever completed magecraft such as contracts exchanged in the past or curses in the way that Rule Breaker can completely nullify them. The spear is not suitable for defensive usage because its effects only last while the tip of Guy Dirge is in contact with the object, and it allows the object to function as normal after the spear is lifted away. In this case, Draco had to be careful, as his armor's nature was similar to that of Mordred's or Artoria's armor, although it was halfway between these and invisible air. The two closed their distance by sliding their feet, silently but with the tension multiplying. Lancer executed the first movement. Compared to the acrobatic freedom of his spear so far, this was a much simpler stabbing only in a straight line. A stab as he refused to defend himself from Draco's sword. It was a simple attack, and Draco reacted instinctively to block Diarmuid's attack. If he were Artoria, this would be the moment Excalibur was revealed to others. One could say that Draco had saved the servant from revealing her identity. The first blow had been a simple one, but it was at that moment that the storm began. This is only the beginning. As Diarmuid said, the spear blows suddenly increased in strength. The attacks were more severe and were no longer in vain. Making no mistake in directing his blows, Diarmuid pointed to Draco's vital signs. To miss to defend even one attack would mean a fatal wound. Draco knew this all too well. That is why his sword repelled each and every attack. Draco could only watch in admiration as Diarmuid showed off his godly spear skills. If it weren't for the skill he had gained from Rama, there was no way that Draco could fight him in his human form. Draco was observing what he had always admired in this life, and in the previous one, true skill with weapons. Having high destructive power, like Levitian's noble Phantasm, was very good. However, it could not be bought with the beauty with which Lancer used his spear. One of the few things Draco of DxD didn't like was the lack of martial arts in the series. Fights always ended up deciding on who had the most destructive power. And although the big explosions were very good and attractive, in Draco's opinion, they were still at a lower level of fighting than the one Draco was having with Lancer. Excitement ran through Draco's body. His willingness to fight increased with every second. Draco defended himself from the uninterrupted series of blows launched by Diarmuid, which was not at all easy. If it weren't for Tuki, who increased his stats by 80%, Draco would have been impaled by the spear more than a dozen times by now. Lancer wanted to hit Draco anyway, but he wasn't going to let himself be hit easily. Having the precedent of the fight between Artoria and Diarmuid, which had not happened because of Draco's intervention, he knew he could not let Lancer's spear hit his armor. Since it was made up of magic, it was totally useless against Diarmuid's spear. He was not going to make the same mistake as Artoria. She let Lancer hit the side of her armor, thinking that it was not enough to penetrate her armor, and strike back with her sword. Thus, Diarmuid managed to pierce Saber's armor with ease. It seems that Diarmuid realized that this combat was getting nowhere, as Draco's defense was also impenetrable. He ceased his attacks and retreated. Yes, it seems that victory would not be won so easily. Musing, Lancer didn't seem too discouraged and spoke rather with a distracted voice. Remarkably, this man enjoyed enormously to compete against a formidable enemy. If Lancer's enemy were one who depended on his noble Phantasm to win, Diarmuid would have an easy time defeating him. For example, Berserker, who depends on his ability to transform any weapon into noble Phantasm, would not stand a chance against Lancer, since these common weapons would lose their noble Phantasm property the moment they made contact with Diarmuid's spear. And only noble Phantasm can cause damage to servants. On the other hand, Draco had grown tired of defending himself. "Get ready, Lancer." Draco took up his position again. He prepared to deliver a lethal blow. His strength was superior to Diarmuid's, so this was an opportunity to take. Even if he failed, Diarmuid would be limited to the attack he could land on Draco. Therefore, even if Draco failed to kill Diarmuid, Lancer could not kill him either. With the sword behind his body, one leg in front and the other behind, Draco dismissed any sign of defense. Regardless of the defense, it was meant to deliver a lethal blow that would split the opponent from one shoulder to the other. That's courageous. Is it all or nothing? Draco only smiled as his intention to kill rose. The pressure he was creating at this moment could be felt all around him, and even the paved ground was slowly giving way. Draco was going through everything in one move. This was a move he had taken from Artoria. She would try the same thing in the original story. Still, there were several differences between what she did and what Draco was doing. When Saber is struck by Diarmuid with his long spear, she removes her armor as she observes that it is useless against Diarmuid's noble phantasm. However, this leaves her exposed to the skills of Lancer's other noble phantasm, the short spear. In other words, Draco had learned from Artoria's mistakes. Thus, he would not fail to kill Diarmuid. Lancer understood this. Draco's next attack will render the range advantage of the long spear useless. If he fails to capture Draco's speed, he will face his end when he cuts him in half. Calmly studying his opponent's footwork, Draco measured the times for his attack. Lancer was probably also estimating the speed of the attack. But he still has one more secret against that. Just for a little while, Lancer's movements are weakened. The asphalt turned into gravel created many obstacles to firm up the feet. Lancer's movements stagnate a little each time he puts strength into his legs. Draco smiled and didn't let it go. A loud bang roars in the atmosphere. Draco's dark sword lit up, turning the darkness of the night with its glow. The heat emitted by the sword suffocated Irisviel, Artoria, and Mordred, who were watching in the distance. Even Maya and Kiritsugu, together with Assassin and Lancer's master, felt the heat burning their bodies. But the one who felt most the suffocating heat emitted by Draco's sword was Diarmuid. He knew that if that sword managed to reach him, he would be reduced to ashes. But that didn't scare him. He was an experienced warrior who was ready to die. After all, he had already died once. Draco reached a speed he had not had before. It was too late for Diarmuid to dodge from the moment Draco had taken the first step. Even if he managed to cause Draco a serious injury, he was going to die. Lancer did not move. Having already given up an ambush, the tip of the red spear did not retreat. What moved in its place were his legs. With an extremely focused mind, the flow of time, even shorter than an instant, stretches out and becomes slower. Lancer's posture was not a mistake. This was the position he had chosen to ensure his victory. This was the very place where he had released his short spear, now hidden by the gravel of the pavement. Draco saw it all the time, the menacing smile when he was sure of his victory. The gleam in his eyes had said more than his words. "I will attack through your recklessness." Instead of picking up the spear in his arm, Lancer kicked the gravel at his feet. It wasn't just gravel that was floating in the air. The short spear that Lancer released earlier, its tip appeared in the air with precision in Draco's direction. As in the long spear, the amulet wrapped around the entire length of the spear was already unwrapped and revealed the yellow metal beneath it. If that was the art of the spear of Lancer, if that servant was the heroic spirit, known as the bearer of the two demonic spears. That's right, a noble phantasm definitely aren't limited to one. The tip of the short spear that Lancer had kicked was swirling with prana as sinister as that of the long red spear, threatening Draco. He was already predicting the moment when it would pierce Draco's heart while he could only charge forward, too late to stop. But what Diarmuid didn't expect was that Draco, instead of backing up or trying to dodge, would keep that provocative smile on his face as he advanced towards Diarmuid. "Master!" Mordred cried out in anguish when she saw the spear heading towards Draco's chest. However, when the spear made contact with Draco's armor, what? Diarmuid could only watch in shock as his weapon was repelled by Draco's armor. In desperation, He retreated as quickly as possible, trying to create a minimum distance from his opponent. But it was too late. "You are dead," Draco shouted just before the end of Diarmuid's life. "Damn it. This is bad." Ryder, who was standing at the arch of Fuyuki Bridge, watching the battle taking place in the warehouse district, muttered slightly as he stood up. What's wrong?" Seeing the giant servant showing impatience for the first time, Waver became agitated and asked Ryder as he clutched at the iron frame. "Lancer and that boy have used decisive techniques. It seems they both want the duel decided quickly. Wouldn't that be favorable for us?" "You fool. What are you talking about?" Ryder kicked the iron frame he was standing on to generate a roar. For Waver, whose entire body was clinging to the frame, the tremor shook him to his bones and raised another shriek. "I wanted to wait until the battle was over before everyone arrived, but looking at the current situation, it looks like that boy is going to be at a disadvantage. And it would be too late to attack by then." "Too late? Didn't you want to attack when they were all exhausted from fighting each other?" "I think you've misunderstood something, kid." Ryder furrowed his eyebrows and turned his head down to look at the master lying at his feet, as if he were disappointed in the performance of a sans serif clown. "I expected the other servants to take the bait from Lancer. Isn't it obvious? Even better than fighting them one by one. It's much better to get them all together and have a real battle." Waver forgot to respond. The impression clouds even his reason as he discovers the differences between his understanding and that of the brave, heroic spirit. Bring them all together. A great royal battle? Yes. It's such a rare opportunity to cross swords with the greatest heroes of all ages. If all 6 of them are here, won't let any of them get away. A fierce, dangerous lion-like growl slipped from Ryder's throat, but there was a hint of laughter as he lifted the edges of his lips. Waver realized that only this man could wear a smile like that. So, that boy and Lancer, they both have the flaming spirit of true warriors. I admire them. It would be a shame to let them die like that. What else is there besides killing them? That's not the point of the Holy Grail. Waver's slightly hysterical voice was mercilessly interrupted by a pat on the forehead. "Victory without ruin, domination without misfortune. That is the true conquest," proclaimed Ryder, holding his chest steady. Then he drew the sword at his hip and cut through the empty air with a wielding, furrowing the empty space. A huge, shining, noble phantasm appeared at once, galloping accompanied by whirlwinds of prana. Waver felt as if he were about to be thrown into the sudden storm, swallowing his cries and squeezing the iron frame even more tightly. "Observation is over. We join the battle, boy." Before his words were finished, Ryder had ridden the noble phantasm with a jump, his cape flapping. "You idiot! You idiot! You're acting nonsensical." "Oh, if you don't want to go, you can stay here and watch." "I'm going. Take me away, you idiot." "Well, that's more in keeping with my master." Ryder gave a clear laugh, gently took Waver by the collar of his jacket, and let Waver ride on his own. "Now come on, Gordius Wheel, Wheel of Heaven's authorities." The noble phantasm responded to the call of the king of the conquerors with a thunderous tremor. A storm arose, a confusion of life and death. The moment Draco and Lancer slid past each other, bright crimson flowers fluttered and bloomed briefly before disappearing in the blink of an eye. Draco, who had charged forward, stopped. He stopped imbuing Levitian with his magical power, so the glow of the sword disappeared along with the heat it emitted. Behind Draco was Diarmuid, or what was left of him. Just as Draco had planned, Diarmuid's body had been split in two by a diagonal cut from his waist to his right shoulder. Both body parts had fallen in different places, leaving a bloody scene. "So here ends my participation in the Holy Grail War. I am sorry, Master." Those were Lancer's last words before he disappeared into magical particles. At that moment, Draco heard Sage's voice. 47,500 experience points have been obtained. Due to the increased difficulty, 47,500 experience points have been obtained. Because of the effects of Tidal Skill, Walking Egg, another 95,000 experience points were obtained. The level of Nephilim Great Dragon King had risen from 118 to 227. Unbelievable. Draco couldn't help but mutter as he watched the notices that Sage was showing him. Apparently, although Sage had increased his difficulty level by being born, Diarmuid was still weaker than Layden. It seemed that this world was considerably weaker than DxD, as even with Sage's meddling, they were still no stronger than the superpowers of Kuroka's homeworld. With Layden, Draco had gained a total of 100,000 experience points. With Diarmuid, Draco should have gotten 95,000, but with Sage's meddling, he had gotten a total of 190,000. Total madness. In total, Draco had climbed 109 levels. Therefore, his statistics had gone up quite a bit. Draco. Race. Nephilim Great Dragon King. Level 227 out of 250. HP 950.000/950.000. MP 980.000/980.000. STR 3225-5125 and 2850-4750. AGI 3575-5475. MAG 3000-4900. Great Dragon King. Index 200 for HP. MAGX 200 for MP. Index 30 for HP Regan. MAGX 30 for MP Regan. An incredible rise in stats, just as those more than 100 levels deserved. Although, in his human form, and with the 2 boosters that Draco had applied, his stats right now were the following. STR 9,225. End 8,550. AGI 19,710. MAG 8,820. Right now his stats even exceeded Artorias. In other words, Draco had probably become the strongest servant in terms of stats. Going back to what had happened in those brief moments of battle when Diarmuid had ended up dying. Against the noble Phantasm Guy Dirge, Draco could not defend himself with just his armor because of the spear's properties. However, the other noble Phantasm of Diarmuid, Guy Bid, could not pierce Draco's armor. In fact, if it weren't for Guy Dirge's special feature, this spear could not pierce Draco's armor either. Diarmuid would never have expected Draco's armor to be so hard as to completely repel Guy Bid, and he planned to use Draco's great speed to pierce the armor completely by his heart. Because of Guy Bid's special effects, which prevent the wounds generated by this weapon from regenerating, there was no way that Draco would not die if it impacted the way Diarmuid wanted. But this was a battle that Lancer was destined to lose. The first warrior of the Knights of Fianna, Diarmuid of the Mole of Love, it has been an honor to fight you, as well as to give you an honorable death. Who knows, we may meet again in the future. The servant participating in the 4th Holy Grail War, Lancer. The heroic spirit of the Celts, Diarmuid Ue Duibni. In the original story, he creates a bond with Artoria through the various combats they coincide with. They should have been both enemy and ally. One of his wishes was to have an honorable death against her. But his most important desire is to serve his lord to the best of his ability. The mere fact that he was summoned to the Holy Grail War can be considered to mean that his wish has already been half fulfilled. Draco's favorite servants are those of the Saber class and those of the Lancer class, and the latter is placed above the former. This is because the Lancers Draco meets through anime are all incredible. Diarmuid in Fate/Zero, Siyu Chulin in Fate/Stay Night, and finally Achilles and Karna in Fate/Apocrypha. All of them are incredible characters that Draco adored and admired in his past life. He had always wanted to be at least half as strong and cool as them. If Draco could have all 4 servants working for him, the dragon would not hesitate for a second. In fact, he had thought of inviting Diarmuid. Still, he knew that he couldn't betray his master because of his personality. That's why Draco couldn't do anything else but kill him. Now, who's next? Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald is the Master of Lancer in the 4th Holy Grail War. He is also known as Lord Elmeloy, as he is one of the lords in the Clock Tower. The lords, monarchs, are people with a lot of reputation and respect that work as the department heads of the 12 faculties. Caneth is the lord of the Department of Mineralogy. This department is quite interesting in the Naceverse, as is the class where some of the important characters of this world attend to, such as Rin Tosaka, Luvia Gelida Edelfelt, and Yvette L. Lehrman, Lord El Malloy II. Caneth is a very wealthy and successful nobleman, a renowned magus from the Mages Association, and a Euryphus. Anyone who knows what Euryphus is can tell me in the comments. Lecturer in the Department of Spiritual Evocation. Caneth demonstrated genius-level talent during his time as a student. He was the youngest lecturer to grace the podium of the Department of Evocation in its history. He has an ancient magical lineage that goes back for over 9 generations. He was born with immense talent and rarely, if ever, encountered any hurdles in life. Due to his great lineage, he had extensive connections. He was expected to form the greatest faction in the Clock Tower. Waver Velvet is one of his students, but Caneth cares little for him, especially after reading Waver's radical thesis concerning increasing magical potential. Caneth decided to tear up his student's manuscript after publicly humiliating him during a lecture. Waver, in retaliation, stole Caneth's artifact and entered the Fourth Holy Grail War. Caneth originally intended to summon Iskandar, but with his artifact, a piece of the torn mantle of Alexander, stolen by Waver, he instead summoned the Lancer-class servant, Diarmuid Aduibni. Nice copy-paste from the wiki, author. You rock. Ignore this lame author comments. Exams are killing my self-esteem. He is engaged to Soliui Nadari Sophia Ree, the daughter of the head of the Spiritual Evocation Division, through an arranged marriage. They apparently do not get along, and Soliui considers Caneth a coward for not going and attacking the opposing masters face-to-face. While he loves her, she does not appear to share the same sentiments. Both of these characters, Soliui and Caneth, are important characters through the start and past half events of the Holy Grail War. They died after Diarmuid by Kiritsugu's companion hands. The only reason he participates in the war was merely to increase his own prominence within the Mages Association. Similar to Diarmuid, he has no specific wish if he win the Holy Grail War, so they technically fit very well together. In the end, Caneth was afraid of Diarmuid stealing his fiancée, so he didn't trust him as much. In Diarmuid's final battle, Kiritsugu forced him to use a command spell to make Diarmuid kill himself. With Draco's battle against Diarmuid, he had changed a lot of events mentioned above and much others which aren't mentioned. And the result of that was, you have successfully changed a person's fate. 1 fate point obtained. You have successfully changed a person's fate. 1 fate point obtained. You have successfully changed a person's fate. 1 fate point obtained. 3 fate points. 1 for each of these characters that was no longer going to participate in this Holy Grail War. Regardless of whether Caneth and Soliui died after this, it didn't matter. Their deaths were no longer related to the Holy Grail War, at least not the way they originally should have been. Therefore, Draco no longer cared about what they were going to do from now on. Although Caneth's Hydrargum volume was an interesting thing, it could do nothing against Draco. While Draco was thinking about all this, he heard a thunder-like noise. So here you are. However, you're a little late, Draco muttered as he looked up to the sky. A flying object made a straight line through the sky and headed straight for its location, scattering purple sparks of thunder in its path. The sound was undoubtedly created by that. Irisviel was mute with astonishment, as she said in shock. A carriage? From its appearance, it was an ancient carriage with 2 bows. It was not driven by war horses, but by handsome bulls with muscles waving like waves. Its hoofs plied the space, pushing the luxurious and splendid chariot. No, the chariot was not merely floating in the air. Its wheels thundered noisily. It was not solid ground, but thunder in which the bulls stood. Every time the bull's hooves and the chariot stepped on the empty sky, violet rays spread like nets, raising the air with deafening roars. The prana sprouting from the rays was probably what Diarmuid could release if he used every ounce of his strength. The difference in level between one servant and another was quite great. Draco already knew that the stats of each servant would not be so different. What really made the difference between one servant and another was his noble phantasm. The noble phantasms of Diarmuid were interesting, but they were far inferior to the servant that was coming. Ryder. The person who had arrived was none other than the king of the conquerors, Iskandar or Alexander the Great, with his weaker, noble phantasm, Irisviel. Although he had nothing of weak, being a noble phantasm of rank A+. No noble phantasm Draco had surpassed rank A, except Levitian Sealed Attack, rank EX. That said a lot about the power of this noble phantasm by Ryder, not to mention that he had an even more powerful one. Normally, when enveloped by such a huge aura of lightning and thunder, the heroic spirit is most likely some kind of god of thunder. And if he was a thunder god with a connection to the bulls, the first one that came to mind would be the greatest of the gods of Mount Olympus. Although this chariot itself cannot be called a heroic spirit, even attached to a heroic spirit, it was quite threatening. This was because, in his life, Iskandar had proclaimed himself a son of Zeus. He even had a divinity of rank C because of this. The chariot went around the skies a couple of times before stopping and settling on the earth. It was placed exactly between Draco and the girls, who were still processing everything that had happened in the previous battle. Not even 5 minutes had passed since Diarmuid's death. The dazzling lights ceased as the carriage landed, revealing the figure of a muscular man, standing dominantly in command of the carriage. "A king has arrived!" This casual roar was almost as powerful as the thunder in the air. His fierce gaze almost had the power to drive Draco back. Draco was a king in his own right, a great dragon king, to be more correct. His aura was not inferior to that of Iskandar, so he would not be intimidated by it. "It seems that I am late. I did not want Lancer to die so soon," murmured the king of conquistadors. He turned his gaze to Draco, and then to Mordred and Artoria, and then continued to speak in a stern tone. "My name is Iskandar, king of the conquerors. I am a participant in this Holy Grail War and receive the class of Ryder. My name is Iskandar, king of the conquerors. I am a participant in this Holy Grail War and receive the class of Ryder." Draco was already expecting this, but the rest were truly amazed. This was normal, as in the Holy Grail War, no servant would have declared his identity, as it could be a key component in his battle plans. Meanwhile, the most agitated person was Waver, who was sitting next to Ryder. "What the hell do you think you're doing, you stupid idiot?" With his fear of Ryder's enormous body forgotten in the confusion, Waver shouted at Ryder as he held on to the mantle of the king of conquerors. Ryder struck a finger on Waver's forehead, which made his protest disappear. "Master!" Mordred left Artoria and Irisviel to return to Draco's side. She completely ignored Ryder, though he didn't care much for her, as he was more concerned about the implication of the way Mordred had used to call Draco. This boy who had killed Lancer was not a servant, but a master? Besides, who was the real saber then, the person in heavy armor or the girl in light armor? Well, that was something to think about later. You fight each other to get the Holy Grail. Before you cross your weapons, I want to ask you something. I don't know what expectations you have of the Holy Grail. But now, consider for a moment whether your desires are even greater than the desire to possess all the earth and the heavens. Although Artoria did not yet understand what he was saying, her instincts told her that those words were full of danger. Her pupils widened involuntarily. What do you mean? I was quite clear. Ryder had retained his dignity by this time, but his voice was much more gentle and friendly. "I have descended upon the battlefield, so do you not intend to obtain the Holy Grail for me? If you did, I would consider you my friends and share in the joy of conquering the world." It was such an astonishing suggestion. Artoria was stunned before she even had a chance to feel anger. On the other hand, Mordred was also stunned and speechless. "Alexander, king of the conquerors. He is certainly an extraordinary heroic spirit. There is nobody else like him in the history of mankind, so full of eagerness to manifest his ambition to conquer the world. But, even so, what about Ryder's suggestion? Coming suddenly, proudly declaring his true name and demanding from others respects before showing his courage in battle. All those actions made it seem that he did not intend to join the war for the Holy Grail. This attitude did not surprise Draco. This was the extraordinary outgoing personality of Iskandar, always direct and sincere about his goals. A man who deserved the respect of everyone who knew him. Conquer the world? I'm sorry, that's a very complicated task for me. I prefer to spend my days in peace with my family. I admire your audacity in declaring your identity right now. However, I will not consent to your proposals. Iskandar turned to look at Draco, who was smiling as he looked at him. I will destroy the Holy Grail. That is my reason for intervening in this war. And none of the servants will be able to stop me. Whoever attempts to do so will suffer the same fate as Lancer. Draco raised his voice, ensuring that all present heard his words. Except for Castor and his master, all the other masters and servants were here listening. Raising his aura to its highest level, which had increased since he had killed Lancer, his presence alone seemed to be able to crush the air. All the people who were not servants found it difficult to breathe for the seconds that this statement lasted. Was this the aura that a master should have? And how could a human intimidate servants of the rank of Iskandar or Artoria in this way? This was Draco's official declaration. His declaration of war to all servants and masters of this Holy Grail war. Does that mean you are rejecting me? Ryder's smile did not fade as he asked Draco. The words Draco had spoken did not seem to have diminished Ryder's ambitions. After all, he didn't care much about the Holy Grail, as this was only the first step in his conquest of the entire world. Enough! The one who interrupted was Artoria, who was outraged by Iskandar's proposal. I am that lord who rules over Britain. No matter what kind of king one is, one could never bow to another lord. Saber? Irisviel exclaimed with concern and disbelief. Basically, Artoria had left her identity uncovered. It doesn't matter. That boy already knows my identity. From the moment that person appeared, it was impossible to hide my identity. Moreover, it is counterproductive to do so, as he may tell the other masters my identity, and then I will have to fight them while I think my identity is still unknown. Besides, I am confident in my abilities to win any battle, even if my identity is discovered. Irisviel sighed. Listening to Artoria's words, she seemed to be right. However, at least she could have hidden her name a little longer. Now the Holy Grail War was getting a little out of control. But Artoria wasn't the only one who was willing to show her identity. Since father has no problem showing himself, how can her heir be less than she is? Mordred's helmet recoiled as she said those words, showing a face identical to Artoria's. I am Mordred Pendragon, the only legitimate son of Arthur Pendragon. She presented herself proudly, even sticking out her chest, though it couldn't be seen because of the heavy armor. Oh, the King of Britain? And also the Knight of Treachery. Ryder showed interest in Artoria's statements and raised his eyebrows. What a fantastic combination. The renowned King of Knights and the Knight of Treachery are actually two young girls. Mordred no longer cared so much about that comment, even though her reaction would have been very different 4 years ago. At the time, she was even willing to attack her master when Tiamat made a similar comment. And would you like to try the blade of that young girl, King of Conquerors? Artoria raised her sword as she lowered her voice. The fighting spirit that came vibrating from the edge was more solemn and majestic than when she fought Mordred. Ryder raised his eyebrows and let out a long sigh. Wow, so this is the break in the negotiations. What a waste, that's so wrong. When Iskandar looked down and mumbled to himself, he found the hateful look that watched him from beneath his feet. He still had the pain of his swollen forehead, but his mortification was more tragic than his pain. Waver's voice passed roughly through the air. Now what? Talking over and over about conquest, and people still dislike you. Do you really think you can beat those three? The burly servant faced his master's question with no sign of remorse, and he began to laugh vigorously. Well, wasn't there a saying that actions speak louder than words? And your action is just shouting your real name like that. Draco took advantage of this moment of confusion to observe Ryder's stats. Iskandar. Race. Human/servant. Status. Normal. LV. 50 out of 100. Strength. 6,731. Defense. 8,413. Magic. 5,048. Agility. 3,365. Waver was so upset that his head was spinning. Using his two weak fists, he began to hammer on Ryder's dungarees, who was standing there, and began to shed tears. Looking at this sad situation, Irisviel felt neither contempt nor sympathy. She just felt that she couldn't take it anymore. The atmosphere had relaxed slightly. "Oh, it's you of all people," and suddenly became tense again with the low, resentful voice that crackled on the ground. He who had spoken was the still, hidden master of Lancer. Ever since he had commanded his servant to use his noble phantasm, his observation had been very silent. He had not even said anything when Lancer had died. Now he was intervening to ask Waver his purpose in coming here. It was a sound that was entirely different from the tone used before, which exposed a heart full of hatred. "And I wondered why you had stolen my sacred relic in your rampage. I didn't think you'd actually have the guts to join Heaven's Feel, Waver Velvet." Waver heard someone call his name with malice, and knew who the subject of that hatred was. Not only that, Waver could guess who the owner of that voice was. Ah! How could he not have predicted this? With such a high rank as the Clock Tower Professor, he could prepare a sacred relic for another heroic spirit, even if Alexander's cloak was stolen. So, in the land of Fuyuki, it was not surprising to have this man standing in front of Waver as his enemy. What a pity! It's a disappointment, really. I actually wanted my poor, dear student to be happy. Waver, someone as mediocre as you alone deserve to possess the quiet, stable life of ordinary people. Waver was dazed with illusions, unable to determine where the voice was coming from. He no longer knew how many times he had experienced the nauseating feeling in his stomach, Professor Kenneth L. Malloy Archibald. The sensation of having those crystal blue eyes that held a mixture of humiliation and pity, the ones that looked down on Waver from the professor's serious, thin face from somewhere above the boy's head. Again, he felt them acutely. Waver wanted to return some astute observations to the professor. Before this professor had succeeded, Waver had skillfully managed to turn the heroic spirit Iskandar into a servant who would obey him. Was that not the best revenge for the humiliation he had suffered in the clock tower for so long? Yes. It is no longer a relationship between teacher and student. He is now my real enemy. I can hate him as much as I want, and even go as far as taking his life. Now he is, without a doubt, my real opponent. During the few years that Waver spent in the clock tower, he had always hated that superb professor at every turn, awake or asleep, even considering killing him on occasion. Yet it was the first time he had faced such enmity from the professor. The young Waver experienced the piercing gaze of a true magician, filled with the desire to kill him for the first time. Anyway, the opposite case was true as well. The owner of the voice saw the petrified fear on Waver's face with his keen eyesight. With a tone of cold mockery that made Waver's hair stand on end, he continued to speak as if he were playing with Waver. "Well, I can't help it, young Waver. Let me give you a few extra lessons. The true meaning of killing among wizards. I will pass on the terror and pain of death to you without any reservation. You should be proud." In fact, Waver was already shaking with fear, not even paying attention to the humiliation brought about by those words. To become a true magician, one must be prepared to be killed. A theory that was usually understood through books was deeply felt by Waver. The look cast by that man from who knows where was even more lethal. The moment a magician wants to kill is when the death sentence is pronounced. Waver did not know that until now. Then something squeezed the thin, lonely shoulders of the boy, who was trembling with terror, into a gentle, powerful embrace. Waver was confused by the harsh, but still gentle touch. The hand of the burly servant, thick fingers that were so thick with calluses, could only induce fear in the low teacher. "Hey, wizard, if I understand correctly, you were supposed to be my master instead of this boy, apparently." Ryder called the missing Lancer master. In fact, his face was covered and twisted by a massive smile of malevolent pity. "That idea is more than ridiculous. The man who deserves to be my master must be a warrior who rides with me to the battlefield, not a coward who doesn't even dare to show his face." Silence descended. Only the teacher's anger, not yet seen, could be felt, spreading through the night air. Ryder laughed suddenly in the empty sky, a thunderous laugh that took the air out of his lungs. Seeing this, Draco could only smile widely. Now is when the real action starts. The climax of the Fourth Holy Grail War's first big event. Come out now. There must be others too. Friends who are hiding in the dark and spying on us. Artoria was in shock. What are you doing, Ryder? Facing a restless saber, the King of Conquerors raised his thumb, accompanied by a friendly smile. This frontal battle is excellent and very good. The unmistakable sound made by the collision of his sword and spear could perhaps attract more than one heroic spirit. Don't you agree? Irisviel was shaking with the idea that Kiritsugu might have been discovered in his unknown hideout, but Ryder only had other servants in mind. Ryder wanted to spread the deafening sound to every corner of the surroundings and roared again. What a pity, truly what a pity. The heroes must have gathered in Fuyuki. Seeing the prowess demonstrated here by this guy and Lancer, doesn't it invoke any feelings? Having a name that deserves praise, and even hiding and spying in secret. What cowardice. Even the heroic spirits would be ashamed to hear this. Huh. After another round of laughs, Ryder shook his head with a fearless expression in the corner of his mouth and ended with a defiant look. Heroic spirits invited by the Holy Grail, gather here at this time. Those cowards who are afraid to show their faces, share the humiliation that Iskandar, the King of the Conquerors, will impart to you. Prepare yourselves. Ryder's enthusiastic speech even reached Amiya Kiritsugu, hiding in the distant port, conducting his observation. He was also heard by Mia, in the opposite position to Kiritsugu. The ancient hero's mind was so far away from Kiritsugu's that he could not help but sigh in response. Did that fool manage to conquer the world? Opposite to the network, Mia also seemed not to understand the situation. Like Kiritsugu and Mia, Kirai, secretly watching, also saw all of Ryder's actions and heard his absurd words through Assassin's eyes and ears. While Kirai was in the distant Fuyuki church, he had already told him everything he had seen and heard to Tasaka Tokiomi through the communication jewel next to him. This is bad. From Tosaka's distant residence, that angry phrase was heard. Although Kirai knew that the announcer could not see him, he frowned and nodded. Certainly, Tokiomi and Kirai did not ignore Ryder's absurd words as Amiya Kiritsugu did. The reason was that both had thought of a particular heroic spirit who would never ignore Ryder's challenging words. Followed by Ryder's roar, a golden light immediately appeared. The light continued to flicker, and there was no longer any surprise in the spectators' hearts. It was no longer just a guess in the air that a fourth servant, that would be 5 counting the late Lancer, had appeared in response to Ryder's provocation. The terrible thing was that the beginning of the hostilities was already gathering for servants, and a master as powerful as the servants. No one could guess what the turn of events would be. As expected, the golden light came from 30 feet above, at the top of a lamppost, where a figure standing in shining armor was seen. Waver held his breath at the sight of such dazzling dignity. This subject is... He had seen him for only an instant the previous time, but there was no mistaking such an intense existence. The one standing calmly at the top of the lamppost was none other than the enigmatic servant who had sent Assassin into oblivion with overwhelming destructive power the night before. This could not be Castor, since his entire body was covered with armor. If he had materialized in response to Ryder's call, it meant that he had the judgment to recognize a provocation as such, so he could not be Berserker. By elimination, the only one left was the last of the 3 classes of knights, Archer. I didn't expect that in one night, there would be 2 fools who would have the insolence to call themselves kings and ignore me. The golden heroic spirit seemed very upset from his first words, scorning those present with an angry look from above. His arrogance and tone was comparable to Ryder's arrogance, but differed from the root. At no time was there any cruelty or lack of pity in the King of Conquerors' tone. Even Ryder did not expect someone more dominant than he was, as he rubbed his chin with a perplexed face devoid of malice. You are confused? I, Iskandar, am he who is well recognized throughout the world as the King of Conquistadors. You fool! The only hero in heaven and earth who is a true king is me. The rest are a bunch of commoners. Archer shot him down with a statement that was much more than an insult. Of course, Saber's face was already drained of color. Still, the tolerant Ryder let out a strange sigh, ignoring him altogether. If you want to say so much, could you introduce yourself first? If you're such a king, couldn't you be ashamed of your fame? In the face of Ryder's taunt, Archer's red eyes filled even more with proud anger as he stared at the giant beneath him. Are you questioning me? A low trash questioning a king like me? Frankly speaking, Ryder's point was reasonable, but apparently, Archer received it as incorrigible disrespect from his point of view. This was not a matter of profiting by concealing his true name, but by his personal irritability. The golden heroic spirit was emitting a clear intent to murder. I yield to you the honor of my presence, and you still cannot recognize me. Such ignorance is not even worth living. After Archer's conclusion, the space around him was deformed into a mist. The next moment, the glow of beautiful swords began to emerge from the empty space. There were swords drawn like spears. Each one of them is decorated with colorful ornaments, emitting a fierce magical power. It is clear that they are not common weapons, but noble phantasm. No doubt this is identical to what happened the night before. The mysterious attack that unilaterally annihilated Assassin. All those who were watching Tosaka's mansion the night before understood that. Waver was petrified. The unseen Lancer Master swallowed noisily. Kiritsugu and Mia, too, watching in the distance, felt the tension. Mordred felt the danger coming from the swords that had come out of nowhere. Master! Yes, that is the strongest servant. Gilgamesh. Draco's senses only told him to get out of that place immediately. But he was not afraid. Meanwhile, a man, who like Ryder and Waver, a master, had followed Lancer's movements throughout the day, and was now watching from behind the scenes in the warehouse. While that man was spying on the battlefield through the vision of a familiar, he was staring at Archer's strange battle preparations. Yes, he was undoubtedly the same. Archer was definitely the golden servant who had defended Tosaka's mansion from the invasion of Assassin the night before. In other words, this was the servant of Tosaka Tokiomi. Aha! With an ancient hatred burning in his one blood-red eye, Matu Kariya let out a laugh in the darkness. Now was the moment he had been looking forward to. He had endured a year of living in hell waiting for this moment. Tosaka Tokiomi, husband of Aoi, father of Sakura, and still the man who had trampled the mother and the daughter's happiness. The hated and cursed enemy who took everything that Kariya had desired, who undid everything. Now the old resentment has been removed. This was the time to confront that man, turning into a sword the hatred boiling in his heart. Kill him? There was an unimaginable pleasure in filling his voice with hate. Now, Kariya understood the meaning of the saying, vengeance is a dish best served cold. Tokiomi himself can wait. First, his servant must be demolished to make him lose the Holy Grail War. He felt a maddening enthusiasm at the thought of Tokiomi's face, stained by the frustrating humiliation. Kill him, Berserker! Pulverize that archer! At that moment, in another place, an unexpected flood of prana swept away in a roar. As everyone watched, the flowing prana gathered and solidified, materializing in the shadow of a robust man. The shadow stopped near the highway that had become Draco and Lancer's battlefield, 2 blocks away from the sea. Truly, this was a fantastic apparition that could not be described in any other way than as a shadow. By the width of the tall figure's shoulders, this was the body of a man, completely covered in full armor without any opening. But it was different from the silver armor that enveloped Saber or the luxurious armor of Archer. This man's armor was black, without any delicate adornment, without any polished luster. Like darkness, like hell, he was just a bottomless black. Also, the face was invisible, covered with a rustic helmet. Deep in a narrowly carved crevice was the horrible light of a pair of eyes with a gaze burning like a flame. A servant that was determined. And yet, what heroic spirit was this sinister apparition about? The Black Knight definitely had none of the glow that the other servants who were already there kept. Artoria, Mordred, Diarmuid, and the King of the Conquerors, Iskandar, as well as the still unannounced Golden Archer, all had that glow. This is the expression of the pride of a heroic spirit. the honor of legends that all praise and yearn for. This is an essential element of his noble phantasm. But the recently appeared Black Knight had nothing of the sort. You could say that he was approaching assassin. The darkness around the black armor definitely possessed a negative wave. Thus, more than a heroic spirit, he should be labeled a vengeful spirit. Seeing both Gilgamesh and Lancelot's appearance, Draco couldn't help but smile. All the actors have appeared on the main stage. I guess you didn't invite this guy to the negotiation, Iskandar. Draco carefully observed one of the strongest servants of the Holy Grail War, Berserker. If he succeeds in killing him, the experience points he would gain would not be few. I don't think he's willing to negotiate, Ryder replied. Nothing but bloodlust flowed from the Black Knight. Even the swirl of prana seemed as threatening as a moan full of deep hatred. So, boy, what kind of servant is that guy? Ryder asked Waver. However, the little master shook his head in amazement. I do not know. I just can't know. What? You are a master, aren't you? Should his strengths and weaknesses be visible to you? As a master who has made a contract with a servant, it is possible to read a servant's condition with powers of clairvoyance. This is a unique ability given by the Grail that has summoned the heroic spirits. This does not work for Irisviel, being a false master, but Waver, the rightful master of Ryder, is able to see through the abilities of other servants and compare them to those of Ryder, to guide him as efficiently as possible in battle situations. In fact, Waver already possessed a clear understanding of the powers of Saber and Archer. But I told you I can't see it. The black guy is definitely a servant, but I just can't read his attributes. Ryder frowned in suspicion after Waver's confusing explanation and looked at the Black Knight again. The armor of the color of darkness showed no characteristic trait and gave no hint of the Maker's lineage. No, it is not just that there are no details that could be seen. Everything is blurred. It wasn't just Ryder. Saber and Irisviel had noticed the same thing. No matter how scrupulously one looked, one could not accurately perceive Berserker's figure. Like an unfocused photograph, the contours of the black armor were always changing, like fog, and you could see it double or triple. Somehow, the material of the armor looked like hallucinations. And it was not the only vision that was affected. Also, it reached the clairvoyance of the masters. This must be a unique kind of spell that falsifies a person's true identity. For it was not a skill of the Berserker class. Draco knew the reason for this. For someone's glory, not for one's own glory, one of Lancelot's noble phantasms. In his Berserker variation, it manifests itself in a kind of dark fog. This prevents the masters from being able to investigate its parameters. Even if he were to remove his helmet, his face would also be obscured and hidden from the eyes of others. It seems we have another troublesome enemy. Saber nodded to Irisviel's murmur. That's not all. Now with 5 opponents, we cannot make any careless moves. In a real battle of all against all, the most reliable tactic is to wipe out those in numerical inferiority by concentrating efforts. Thus, if one were to show his weakness here and now, he might be forced into the worst outcome, a hopeless battle of 4 against 1. In this case, not even Saber would have a chance. Who will begin to attack whom, and who will seize the opportunity to make this move? And this is true for all heroic spirits. Right now, Ryder is not targeting anyone in particular. His purpose at this time will probably be to observe all the heroic spirits participating in the War of the Holy Grail. But as someone who does not know fear, he is the kind of man who would respond to anyone's challenge. Archer clearly sees Ryder and Saber as his enemies. It seems that the golden heroic spirit does not find it pleasant that those two call themselves King of Conquerors and King of Knights. His favorite target possibly is the one who provoked him, Ryder. The most troublesome ones in this place were the mysterious Mordred and his master. Although Draco had already expressed his desire to destroy the Grail, no one could know his true feelings. Besides, he had already demonstrated enough power to kill a servant, so special care had to be taken with him. There remains one troublesome person, Berserker. No one could figure out what the intention of the Black Knight was materialized here and now. It added to the fuss that no one could take control of the situation. No wise master would think of condemning his servant amid this chaos. No doubt anyone would be equally cautious of Berserker, and even he was no exception. There was no doubt or hesitation in Archer's red eyes. He alone held an absolute rage and intent of murder as he looked down on Berserker. The disgusting look of the Black Knight was fixed on him alone, standing on the top of the lamppost. Undoubtedly, the golden heroic spirit could see that. "You mad dog, do you expect pity from me?" The look of the garbage is equally low and unclean. To be the target of this glance is an intolerable misfortune for a nobleman. For Archer, who claims the title of an even greater king than Ryder, Berserker's bad manners made him a complete criminal. All the swords and spears that looked like treasure changed direction. Now his points were entirely aimed at his new objective. That is, Berserker. "You must at least entertain me when you are broken, you vermin." A sword and spear fluttered in the air after the disheartening verdict. Weapons coming out of nowhere fired without warning. This must be why the heroic spirit is an archer. But this rough, noble phantasm was too abnormal. The noble phantasm, which should be a treasure for the heroic spirit, was being thrown so carelessly, as if you threw a handful of stones. Yet, the destructive power was enormous. The surface of the road flew, as if it had been hit by an explosive blast, and the scene was enveloped by asphalt dust pulverized into particles. Everyone swallowed saliva anyway. In the thick dust, the shadow of the dark, tall figure wavered in its visibilities. Berserker was stopped intact. He had merely moved from his starting point, where the road had become a crater. Of the weapons thrown by Archer, the spear is the one that caused this, hitting its target after being slightly delayed. And the sword that should have reached its target a little before the spear had not caused destruction. The reason for that would be that the sword was in Berserker's hands. How many had observed the sudden offense and defense? At least Irisviel and Waver could not understand what had happened at that moment. Really, Berserker had grabbed the precious sword, the first attack launched by Archer, without much effort, and with his newly acquired weapon he had deflected the second attack, the precious spear. That bastard, is he really a Berserker? Ryder responded with a roar to Mordred's murmur. For someone who has given up his reason for madness, he is a remarkably skilled fellow. A noble phantasm is a weapon for the exclusive use of the heroic spirit that owns it. Another heroic spirit holding it in his hands would not be able to handle it properly. Whether by miracle or by skill, it should be impossible to repel a consecutive attack so clearly in only one moment. But still, more than surprise, apparently it was anger that was concentrated in Archer. All sorts of grimaces twisted his elegant face, stunned into a murderous frenzy. "How dare you touch my treasure with your dirty hands? You want to die so badly, you scoundrel." The air around Archer began to dance again. Like a halo, a golden majesty turns in a circle to show a horde of new noble phantasm. Now 16 of them. Not just swords and spears. There are axes, hammers, and halberds. Even items of indefinite use or origin. Sharp-bladed weapons of strange shapes. Each one of them was polished like a mirror, and still possessed an enormous amount of prana flowing from them. None of them is below the level of a divine mystery. All of them, without exception, are certainly noble phantasm. That it is not possible, that's what Waver thought out loud. And the other masters and heroic spirits probably thought similarly. A heroic spirit doesn't have to stop at just one noble phantasm. Sometimes, one can treasure 3 or 4 super weapons that qualify as such. But none could have so many. And here, Archer is throwing them one after another, as if he had an inexhaustible supply of them. And none of them had even been seen in the battle against Assassin the night before. Let's see how far this compulsive little thief can go. Calm down, King of Heroes. Someone actually dared to interrupt Archer. Gilgamesh looked at Draco, who had dared to interrupt the king's actions. A commoner dares to interrupt me despite knowing my great status. Gilgamesh's gaze was only condescending as he looked at Draco. However, his face revealed shock for an instant when he saw through him with his clairvoyance. Gilgamesh clairvoyance manifested in his noble phantasm, Shan Nakba Imuru. He who saw the deep, the omniscient, omnipotent star, allows him to discern heavily concealed truths with a single glance, from that of the opponent's true name and noble phantasm to possibly even seeing through a piece of the demise of human history. Even though, for some reason, he maintains his noble phantasm limited. I was wrong. You are not a mere commoner. To hear the King of Heroes tell someone that, when he had only considered Enkidu as someone other than a commoner, said a lot about what he had seen in Draco. Besides, that sword. How did you get it? Well, it doesn't matter. That's one of the few treasures I don't have. Hand it over. For a moment, Gilgamesh's curiosity took hold before his personality woke him up. I don't wanna. Draco's response was clear and concise. His smile said it all. He didn't even think much of Gilgamesh. Do you dare to defy the orders of this king? Then you must simply die. Step aside, Mordred. Gilgamesh's weapons changed direction once again. His new target was none other than Draco. At Archer's command, the group of noble phantasm floating in the air were set free, charging at the dragon. A loud roar shook the night air, and a flash of light exploded across the sky. Who would believe that such destruction could be achieved by throwing swords and other similar weapons? Countless noble phantasms rained down on the warehouse district street that already looked as if it had been bombed. Still, Gilgamesh's relentless attack did not stop. The noble phantasms fell like thunder, fired at the place where Draco was standing, with enough force to disperse anything, and continued to pound and pound and pound. The attack was continuous, even growing in violence. That's because the target, Draco, just wouldn't fall. Everyone was in shock. Even in a critical situation with a large number of enemies around, everyone shared the same thoughts. Even Mordred could only look in amazement at her master. With one hand on his sword, Draco defended himself from the attacks of the noble phantasm that were directed at his head, and he just ignored the rest. With such attack power, the weapons should be able to penetrate the armor that Draco wore. However, Gilgamesh was unable to pierce Draco's armor. Both the offensive and the defensive were on a par. Watching these two fight, Saber shuddered. If she was going to advance in the Holy Grail War, she would have to cross arms with these two. But in the face of beasts beyond reason, how should she prepare to stand firm then? The Golden One seems proud of the number of his noble phantasm, but the guy in the armor has the worst affinity with him. Artoria and Mordred looked at Iskandar in confusion. Even Mordred, who knew her master's abilities best, did not know what he was thinking here. I had heard of a very special skin, but did not expect to see it in a master's and applied in this way. As Iskandar calmly commented, Draco did not step back from Gilgamesh's fierce attack. Instead, he was slowly moving forward. What do you mean, Ryder? Artoria couldn't help but ask. Whatever information she obtained was important for future battles. In ancient Greece, there was a divine beast similar to the Yugalu in Babylon. These beasts can reject human civilization, acting as a singularity that rejects human civilization itself. This ability remains in their skin, which has been used to create that armor. A divine beast of ancient Greece with such characteristics, Mordred was not slow to find out who it was. Nemean lion. That's right. Before Draco marched to Naciverse, he received a god's visit, mentioned in Chapter 226. This was Aphrodite, who had responded to Draco's proposal, which we will discuss in a later chapter. Flashback. Once Aphrodite left Draco's house, he looked carefully at the skin of the Nemean lion, not feeling sure what he should do with it. Should I hang it on the wall as a trophy or something? Draco really couldn't think of any other way to put this skin to use. Object detected with possibility of becoming a noble phantasm. Sage's voice surprised Draco as he was thinking about what to do. What do you mean? In my internal memory, there is data from a noble phantasm related to the object you hold in your hands. You can turn it into a noble phantasm by spending a fate point. Really? Can I find out what the noble phantasm is before? Damn, this was much better than Draco had expected. Yes, showing noble phantasm data. Pelt of the divine beast. Type. Owner. Range 1. Maximum number of targets, 1. The pelt of the divine beast is the pelt of the Nemean lion, obtained by Heracles after exterminating the beast during his first labor. The beast's skin, through an arduous method, was worked by Heracles into the form of a long, decorated cloth with a distinct pattern. The Nemean lion can reject human civilization, so the pelt is invulnerable to attacks delivered by human weapons. However, it will not be ripped apart easily. Wait, isn't this too broken? Draco couldn't help but wonder. He was going to leave at birth in just a few days and was going to confront servants whose greatest powers resided in their noble phantasms, most of which were weapons created by humans. For example, the Gate of Babylon was very powerful, but it was filled with weapons that are part of human civilization. That is to say, only Ea and Enkidu were capable of doing anything to it in case of confronting Gilgamesh. However, this was not big enough to cover his whole body. Can you transform this into armor? It can. However, the extent of this depends on your magical power. Also, it will cost an extra fate point. Perfect, redeem them right now. Using 2 fate points, you have obtained the noble phantasm, pelt of the divine beast, now called armor of the divine beast. The violent crackling sound stopped when the last of the 16 noble phantasm fell. In the void of silence, there was only Draco in the midst of the descending dust. The surroundings, including warehouses and lamp posts, were completely ruined. The dragon was looking directly over him, where Archer was standing on the only remaining lamp post. All the noble phantasms of Gilgamesh had been left by the wayside. Not a single blade had reached the black armor. Since you know what race I belong to, you should also know that you don't deserve to stand on top of me. Know your place, Gilgamesh. Damn tone. Are you trying to put me on the same ground as you? Me, who should be on top? For the 3rd time, the space around him twisted to materialize horde of weapons. The next count of noble phantasm burners reached 32. This time, even Ryder was silent. Draco had withstood a continuous attack of 16 noble phantasms, but there was no way he could withstand twice that number. That was the same for all the other servants. No one could estimate any longer the limits of the Golden Archer's latent power. Draco only snorted at the words of Gilgamesh. You are only the strongest of mortals. Even I do not consider myself the strongest, and you see that my powers are not weaker to yours, even when I am trapped in this weak body. Gilgamesh raised an eyebrow and seemed to think of several things for a moment. Finally, he moved his hand, and the 32 weapons disappeared as easily as they appeared. He made a move that surprised everyone, jumping off the lamp post to stand in front of Draco. You have caught my attention, but I still do not consider you my equal. Tell me your name. A smile blossomed on the dragon's face. Draco. Gilgamesh is serious. He plans to open the gate of Babylon even more, Kodomine Kirai told Tosaka Tokiomi through the communication jewel. Kirai was watching the battle from Assassin's eyes as he conveyed what had happened to Tokiomi. Both were surprised by Draco's power when he killed Lancer, but were now a little worried because of his power to defend himself from Gilgamesh. Tosaka Tokiomi held his head after hearing Kirai's comment. The basement of the Tosaka mansion had nothing of the mess of the distant warehouse district that had become the battlefield. Kirai, manipulating assassin, brought the results. The conditions were perfect. The only thing that was not part of the calculations was that, leaving aside Draco and Mordred, Gilgamesh had come to the present time as the Archer class. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the Archer class's characteristics are the power of its noble phantasm. For Gilgamesh, who possessed an extraordinary one of the EX range, it could have been inevitable. But in the end, the independent action skill of the conceited king of heroes was too high rank, which was certainly the biggest miscalculation. Tokiomi respected the king of heroes' great prestige as much as he could, and as much as he deserved. But to think that his tolerance would be tested so much and so early, Gilgamesh was to be the last to act. Right now, it's still Assassin's turn to act and gather information. Something so reckless as to expose the gate of Babylon again to everyone, and throw all his strength against the mysterious Draco. This simply cannot be overlooked. For a servant with the ability to independent action, who does not trust his master, The only way to give him orders are the command spells. This grants the right for only 3 absolute commands. To return a servant to Gilgamesh, who does not have an ounce of respect for his master. They're the most precious thing Tokiomi had. Always maintain your elegance. This is a family precept passed down through generations in the Tosaka family. For him, who keeps it in his heart, being urged to waste a command spell before all other masters. Teacher, your decision? Kirai urges him with a harsh voice from the other terminal of the communicator. Gritting his teeth, Tokiomi stared at the back of his right hand, just as he was about to use one of them. Wait! Kirai's voice stopped Tokiomi's movements. What's going on? Gilgamesh has retreated. He has closed the gate of Babylon on his own. Draco, a good name, worthy of someone of your race, although it is very unoriginal. Gilgamesh nodded, looking satisfied for some reason. His crimson eyes had already lost the flame of the assassination attempt. You avoided death by a hair, you mad dog, he said as he looked at Berserker, who had not moved while watching the battle between Archer and Draco. With his steady arrogance, the Golden Archer glanced down the row of servants. You commoners, lower the crowd next time. I will tolerate nothing but a true hero. With this last carefree warning, Gilgamesh canceled his materialization. The golden armor lost its physical state and disappeared, leaving only the remains of its radiance. The confrontation between the 2 knights, gold and black, reached its conclusion in a way that no one expected. Umph. This archer is too reckless, Ryder exaggerated with a bitter smile. However, everyone else figured this was not the time for a sloppy comment. Both the mysterious Berserker who had defended himself so well from Archer's attacks and the boy who had even managed to be recognized by the King of Heroes were still there, standing in front of them. Berserker's burning eyes wandered through the empty space, having lost their target. Then, finding new prey, they lit up again. Pointed by those eyes tinged with the color of malice, Saber felt a chill run down her spine. You are... The voice seemed to boil from the ground. Like a spell, like a curse, it was a moan full of malice that hardly resembled human speech. This was Berserker's voice. It was the first time that the others had heard it. A-R-U-R-H. Like a spell with a human form, inflated with murderous intent, the Black Knight charged toward the Silver King of Knights. Prana is consumed not only to keep the servant materialized, but also for all the efforts he makes. Thus, in battle, the rate of consumption is higher. The prana is extracted from the master's magic circuits and supplied to the servant. And the activation of the magic circuits, in Korea Matu's case, means the hell of the pain of seeing his body consumed by the worm crests. When dematerialized, the consumption of prana is minimal. But even in that state, Korea was tortured by palpitations and dizziness. But when Berserker was materialized, the agony was beyond imagination. The foreign body awakens and begins to eat his flesh, crunching his bones. Acting like Korea's pseudo-magic circuits, the worm crest delivered the absorbed prana to Berserker without any concern for the host's limits. Talk of agony is not half the story. Being corroded, plundered by a living creature inside his body, the pain of being eaten alive is doubled by fear and disgust. G-U-H. Jiegua, HH, hidden in the darkness, Korea drowned out his cry of impending death, tearing his throat and chest. When his skin broke and began to spill blood, he began to bite the nails off both hands. And worse, the consumption of prana required of the master by the Berserker class is even greater. When Zokin had Korea use the formula for insanity during the invocation to make him stronger, perhaps that was already a plan of the old mage to tyrannize him. The worms were biting his spine. The worms are melting his nerves. The worms are nesting en masse inside Korea's body. The worms are 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 the worms. Gah! He was unable to contain his scream, but only an emaciated groan erupted. The intense pain strangled him, and he could not get out of his throat. When he began to sob, Korea continued to abuse his body in anger. He could not even observe Archer and Berserker's fight on the main street. He had not even noticed that Berserker was not even fighting. When the storm of pain finally subsided, Korea took some time to recover his ability to think and understand the situation. Ha! Ha! Breathing harshly in the last traces of his agony, Kiriya continued his observation of the battlefield through the vision of his familiar. There are still 3 servants left. Archer could not be found anywhere. The battle is over. The battle has not been won. Perhaps Tokiomi made Archer escape by understanding his disadvantage. Kiriya's Berserker did not step back from the overwhelming Golden Archer. With a magical art trained in 1 year, Kiriya was able to rival the magic of Tosaka polish for generations on his own. Fuhu-ha! Emaciated, Kiriya laughed roughly at his theory. He succeeded. That conceited magician was finally splashed with mud by an ordinary man like Kiriya, after always making those like him less. Kiriya mocked Tokiomi and Zoken enormously in his heart, thinking, "Did you see that? I am not a loser. No one will call me a failure or a bug anymore. I can fight you. I will let you know what fear is. That's enough for tonight. There is no reason to continue a battle that will only torture you now that your sworn enemy, Archer, has retreated. Just let the other servants kill each other as they wish." When he formed his conclusion, Kiriya was the most terrified of all those who saw Berserker take Saber as his new target and lash out at her.